Joining me in a special edition of the NEC Sports Podcast and Courtside Ballers is Mason Asher, a expert in girls basketball across the state of Indiana, as we get ready for the 51st IHSAA Girls Basketball State Tournament. Mason, how are things going for you as you stay warm in this ever so chilly Monday evening here in the state of Indiana? But it's starting to heat up in terms of what girls basketball is going to look like and whatnot. What are some initial thoughts as we get ready for this state tournament as things start to unfold for the tournament?
Yeah, well, I'm staying warm with the cold here. Obviously, we also got a lot of snow and pipes haven't frozen, power's still on, so we're doing about as best we can. But yeah, I mean, we're wrapping up another really good year of high school girls basketball around the state. And looking at my initial thoughts at most of the sectionals are, as per normal, we've got some really good draws that are going to set up for some fantastic, final games of sectionals. And then obviously some brackets are, a little bit lopsided as normal. But again, like in every, Indiana State tournament, it's kind of geared for something to happen that's unexpected. And I think, this year, again, we'll have some upsets. We'll have some teams, get, where they should be in the tournament based on how they've played so far. But I mean, regardless of that, I'm excited for another year of high school tournament and state basketball.
That is for sure. So what we're going to do here is that we're going to go through all 64 sectionals. We'll begin in 1A and we'll move all the way up to 4A. We're going to try to go through these as quickly as possible, but still also give our thoughts and perspectives of each sectional. There's 64 of them, so we don't want to go through every single team and every single thing, but there might be some sectionals we may discuss a little bit more as we go through the course of the section and whatnot. So give me just a moment here and we will go ahead and get things started here. All right, so take a look at sectional 64. It's going to be taking place at Tecumseh Central Time Zone here. And look at this sectional, Mason. You got Springs Valley at 15-6, Evansville Christian at 15-6 as well. Tecumseh's been a power over the years, but this year is a down year for them. Memorial's having a down season, so kind of feels like a crash course of Springs Valley and Evansville Christian, maybe.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Obviously Springs Valley here has the easiest draw, kind of a beeline in the sectional final. And it's expected that Evansville Christian and Wood Memorial will probably end up meeting in the sectional semifinal, which should be a really, really solid game. Wood Memorial and Evansville Christian had played already once this year. That was a 20-point game won by Evansville Christian. And so I would probably assume that it would be close to a similar result. Like, I think Evansville Christian is the better team in this matchup. And so, I presume it's going to be a Springs Valley Evansville Christian matchup in the state or in the sectional finals. And I think that's going to be a really good game. Both teams are very equally matched. Both teams have been playing, really good basketball. Both teams, are taking care of business against teams they need to take care of. But I would probably give the advantage here a little bit to Springs Valley. I think they just have had a little bit better of a resume this year. But this game, this sectional is really a 50-50 for me. I could see, either of those two winning it, or Wood Memorial could get hot and, kind of go on a run.
I probably agree with that. So sectional 63, hosted by West Washington, a pretty large sectional here in this sectional. And Borden 16-4, I believe they won the sectional, the state championship last year in Class 1A. So you got Borden take on South Central. Henryville's got the bye; they wait the winner of that game. And then you got other than that, I think West Washington 12-11 is a decent team, but I think overall, Mason, I think this is Borden sectional to lose here.
Yeah, I agree. I think Borden. For me, I've said all year long that Borden is the best team in the South. They've been without Ava Wheeler for the majority of the year. She just came back. She was a junior Indiana All-Star last year, Division I prospect. So, for them to be 16-4, basically without having her for, whatever it was, 17, 18 games of the season, to beat some of the teams that they beat is really good. And just to get her back in the mix is going to be excellent. So for me, I think Borden wins this one pretty handily, and it would be a massive upset if they didn't, in my opinion.
Yeah, would be my guess would be for sure. Let's go ahead and take a look at sectional 62, hosted by North Davies. North Davies is 15-5. That's a solid team there. Lugodi is 14-5. They've had a tradition of basketball success. Orleans 17-3. They've had some nice teams in recent years. And Bar Reeve, solid 12-17. Maybe slightly overlooked in this sectional, but Mason, I think look at this sectional. I think it kind of like 64, relatively competitive sectional.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely very balanced. And even how it was drawn, it was pretty balanced. I think you've got, there's 4 teams that stand, kind of above the rest for me in this one. Bar Reeve and Orleans both on the same side, and then you've got Lagudi and North Davies on the bottom half of the bracket. So, this could be a really, really solid semifinal day of action down there at North Davies. But you can't really count out Vincent's Reveille, who's 8-12, but they have played a really pretty tough schedule. They've got some nice wins on the year. This is one of those where it's kind of anyone's game. For me, I think Orleans probably has a little bit of the upper hand in this one, even though it's at North Davies. They kind of been playing really well as of late. If you look past the recent loss to Bedford North Lawrence, since December, the middle of December, they've won 12 or 13 games in a row. They've beat a lot of these opponents in regular season already this year. So I think, if I had to make a prediction, I'd go with Orleans here, but this is going to be actually probably one of the more wide open sectionals in the state.
Yeah, this would definitely be a tough one. Bar Reeve cannot be completely rolled out as well. I would go personally. I probably would, and I don't know anything about the southern part of the state, so just a heads up. Probably lean towards North Davies, but again, I'm with you. I think this is a very competitive sectional. Sectional 61, hosted by Clay City, and I think when you look at this sectional, it kind of feels like a hodgepodge, if you would, of who's going to come out of this sectional live here. Because you look at this sectional, and there's none of these records are like super impressive, so to speak. So I think it's all going to come down to which team gets hot at the right time and whatnot. Maybe it's Clay City, maybe it's Shakamak, maybe Cloverdale, maybe it's I believe this is White River Valley, and they've been playing much better ball of late as well. What are your thoughts, Mason, on this sectional?
Yeah, this reminds me of those sectionals that I know we'll run into again this year. In those sectionals where there's just not really a team that you'd say, oh, yeah, that's a good team. I think there's a lot of teams who are fairly close in talent level. As you can see here, there's a lot of teams that are right around 500, but out of this sectional, there's no one that's going to really, scare anyone in the South in 1A. I've seen both Shakamak and Cloverdale play. I think Cloverdale is probably the better of the two teams. And they face off, right there front center on, I believe that'd be Wednesday night. So I think the winner of this sectional is going to come from that game. But I do think the bottom, half of the bracket is by far the strongest, of the top and bottom. So I think the winner is going to come from the bottom, and I think it's going to be whoever wins that opening round game between Shakamak and Cloverdale.
Yeah, I probably would agree with that as well. I think that would be the matchup that really got my attention right away, is that Shakamak Cloverdale matchup there in 61. Sectional 60, hosted by Jacksonville. This sectional, you got Shaw Memorial 14-6, Oldenburg Academy is 17-3, but I don't know exactly how Oldenburg Academy's schedule stands with the others. Trinity Lutheran 17-4. That's a pretty tough first round matchup on the 4th between Lutheran and Oldenburg. Maybe that's the game that potentially decides who wins the sectional, maybe?
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on there. I think those two teams are, by far the best two teams in the sectional. I think Shaw Memorial could cause a little scare potentially to them, and I think Shaw Memorial has an easy road to the sectional championship, but I just don't think that they're on the same level as either Trinity Lutheran or Oldenburg Academy. And that's no slight, obviously, to Shaw Memorial. I think that Trinity and Oldenburg are just, the two of the better programs in 1A South, and it's unfortunate they have to match up in the first round. They've played once already this year, and Oldenburg won that game. So I think that Oldenburg, I think Oldenburg's a little bit better, but it's a toss-up. But if I had to pick a school to win that one, it'd be Oldenburg Academy. And an unfortunate sectional championship game in the first round.
Yeah, just for the sake of being different, I'm going to lean towards Trinity Lutheran, but this is going to be a very tough matchup. Nonetheless, it's sectional 60. Likely decides the sectional as a whole, as you mentioned. Sectional 59, excuse me, we're not at 55 just yet. Sectional 59 hosted by Waldron. And in this sectional, you got Tri at 14-5, kind of an underrated team in 1A. They've been playing some good basketball this year. Knightstown 13-6, another underrated team in 1A. Edinburgh 11-9, Morristown 10-9. Again, kind of like a couple sectionals ago, this is a pretty balanced sectional overall. But maybe you look at Tri, maybe you look at Knightstown. Maybe those are the two likely sectional contenders.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Tri is probably on paper the best team in this sectional, but I don't want to count out North Decatur. I see, they're 9-11, but they're 7-1 against opponents in the sectional so far this year, with their only loss being to Tri by 17. So I think that that's going to kind of be the de facto sectional championship there in the semifinals. All the other teams that have played, in this sectional besides Tri and North Decatur have kind of beaten up on each other a little bit. But I think Tri on paper and talent-wise is just a little bit ahead of everyone. So my pick here is Tri.
I would pick Tri as well. They've had some deep runs in the past. I know just 3 years ago when Bethany Christian made it all the way to state, they played Tri in semi-state. So they have built themselves to be a nice 1A power in recent years in the 1A South resurgence. And by the way, Tri was still in the northern. Was it in the northern half or were they in state final? I don't remember for sure. They might have still been in the South at that time, but I know they played Tri at one point just a few years ago and whatnot. So Sectional 58, hosted by Greenwood Christian. This section of Victory College Prep at 14-4. Greenwood Christian's 11-10. Eminence 15-5. Solid team this year for Eminence. Otherwise, though, this sectional is not the best, one of the best sectionals in 1A, but I think you look at Eminence, maybe Victory College Prep, maybe Greenwood Christian could pull an upset. What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think this section is probably one of the worst ones in the state. I think everyone's, pretty close, similarly talent rating, talent-wise, I should say. I think Greenwood Christian probably wins this one, and I think they probably win it pretty easily. They've played the toughest schedule. That's not saying much because their schedule is ranked in the 300s. But they've played a lot of these teams before. They played Lutheran, beat them by 18. They beat Traders Point Christian, unfortunately 68-0. They've beaten Eminence by almost 20 points already this year. I think that they've probably played, teams a little bit better to put them in a position to, win a one and done situation. So I'm going to go with Greenwood Christian. And I think if they get beat, it would be kind of surprising to me.
Yeah, I probably agree with the host here of Greenwood Christian advancing here. Sectional 57 hosted by Purdue, Broad Ripple. And I think kind of like the one we just mentioned, this kind of feels like it's a one-sided sectional, I think. Is this Tinley sectional this year?
Yeah. If Tinley doesn't win, we'll have to check on the pulse of everyone in the state because Tinley is by far the best team. They should beat everyone by 30 or more points.
Yeah. That's the thing about those 1A sectionals. You got a lot. You get some sections where you can tell like there's definitely a major gap between the one versus everybody else. Sectional 56 hosted by Union City. Again, kind of like some of the sectionals we mentioned earlier. This feels like a one-sided sectional. Randolph Southern's had good teams recently, but boy, is that a tough one with Monroe Central as their first game. And I would argue, based on the way Monroe Central is playing this year, they got a squad this year in 1A. I know they played some teams in our area, and they've beaten some of our area teams pretty convincingly this year, especially like South Downs by 13 points, right? That's a battle-tested team there. They got Blackford coming up this week, potentially. We'll see how the weather goes there. But I would say Monroe Central is a pretty big favorite in their sectional.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the two best teams, as you look there at the Monroe Central schedule, they lost early in the year to Daleville, and then the only other loss was to Eastern Hancock in early January, which, Eastern Hancock with Kinsey Cook is, one of the better 2A teams in the state, and, we're going to give any 1A program, kind of some trouble. So, yeah, I agree with you. Monroe Central, Randolph Southern, that's the sectional championship. I would also give the edge to Monroe Central, as they've already beaten Randolph Southern by, I think it was 22 earlier this year. So,
Yeah. Now we get to sectionals that I'm more familiar with. We begin with sectional 55, hosted by Southern Wells in the beautiful Raider Dome in Panito, Indiana. There has been some talk about Southern Wells potentially leaving the ACAC in the future. There are some future conference members potentially in this sectional in the future, as the Southern Wells and MEC are linked to a potential membership in the future. We're still waiting on anything else on that. But right now, Southern Wells is still in the ACAC. They are the host of this sectional. And you look at this sectional, Mason, this sectional is very interesting. This is one of the better sectionals I've seen in a while in 55. You got Northfield with a squad under Matt Hines with Tegan Bear on there. They got the Hubbard kids there, and they got a lot of freshmen and sophomores there. Emma Wilson's a solid center. You got Emily Miller from the volleyball team. She's going to pick up her game of late, kind of quietly having a nice year in a solid role. Bryn Doubles are leading three-point shooter, 40% from deep. They're squad. And if you know anything about Mike Hines from his days at Huntington North, his teams are going to be physical. They're going to be disciplined teams. They're going to play good defense. And that's what makes Northfield such an intriguing matchup in this sectional. Yes, Tri-Central, I think, is a solid opponent for a first-round game. I think Northfield's going to be favoring that matchup. And they got North Miami and Daleville. You mentioned Daleville earlier. They've had a nice team this year. And I think that's going to be a toss-up game to see what happens in that other matchup between North Miami and Daleville. I think Northfield had some trouble with North Miami in the past. They actually lost North Miami by only a single point just a week or so ago, 2 weeks ago, I should say. So North Miami would be an intriguing matchup there. Southwood's on a 3-game skid right now, but I think their draw is pretty favorable for Southwood, especially. They got a team with nice balance. They got some athletes from the other sports there. So I think it favors Southwood pretty nicely, but watch out for Southern Wells. They play some pretty tough defense. Kaylee Davis, one of the best 2A players in our area, and she's picking up her offense, playing good defense. They're a pretty selfless team. The only problem I have with Southern Wells is they are a very small team this year. They only average around 20 rebounds per game. That's going to be a concern when you're playing against bigger teams like Northfield and whatnot. So, Mason, I'm going to go right to you after this point, but based on this sectional, I think it's going to be a competitive sectional, but I'm feeling like, to me, based on what I'm seeing this sectional, I'm actually going to lean towards the Northfield Norse.
Ooh, okay. Yeah. I mean, like you said, this is going to be a really competitive sectional. Northfield, Southwood, North Miami, Southern Wells, even Daleville are probably, there's would be no surprise if any of those teams win this. I think Southwood had a good draw here. I think that I would pick Southwood, but personally, just to go against you here. That's who I kind of had in my mind. They've played, the toughest schedule of anyone in this sectional. They've played the only top 200. They're on a little bit of a skid here as of late. But I think that they're going to be able to put it together in the sectional to win, kind of utilizing a good draw to do so.
Yeah, and also keep in mind that they're scheduled to play Southern Wells tomorrow at the time of this recording. So that could be a precursor to what's to come for the section and whatnot. They've already faced Northfield twice. They lost the first game by 12. The second game was the Wabash County Tournament Championship. That was only a 1-point game, and Northfield needed every single point from every single one of their players to get that done in that Wabash County Tournament. So they could go either way in this sectional. But again, I'm leaning towards Northfield. But I like your prediction as well. Southwood could potentially be a team to watch as well. Sectional 54, hosted by Bethesda Christian. I think immediately off the top, looking at this sectional, Rossville to me feels like the favorite, but this sectional is pretty loaded. There's only 2 teams with a losing record. Clinton Central's a solid team. Bethesda Christian, decent team, but Carroll Floor is good as well. But I'm really thinking it's probably Rossville. It's probably a slight favor, but it's going to come down to what happens in that first round matchup against Clinton Central, their conference rivals.
Yeah, this I think I'm right there with you. I think Rossville probably is the favorite in this one. I saw them actually play Carroll Flora last year in December. Well, I guess this season, last year, calendar year in December, and Rossville pretty easily won that game. I think it was probably a 17 to 20 point game. They just recently beat Clinton Central by 18 points. So I think, Rossville's kind of had the upper hand on, all the other teams in the sectional so far this year. I think Rossville's a really solid team in 1A. I've kind of been big fans of them all year long with just that one loss, which wasn't a bad loss at all to Lewis Cass. So I'm going to go with Rossville on this one. But I think, Carroll Flora or Clinton Central could potentially play spoiler.
Yeah, I'm leaning towards Rossville as well. They've had some experience in recent years of playoff success. Sectional 53 hosted by North Vermilion. Not as good in this sectional as the one we just talked about, but I think Fountain Central, I think, is going to be an intriguing team. One team I think we need to mention, Faith Christian is one to watch as a potential sleeper in this sectional, partly because with Faith Christian, they have played a little bit of a harder schedule than some of the other teams in this sectional and whatnot. So, yeah, the record is 12-7, but they have played some pretty tough teams, one of which against Rossville in 1A and whatnot. But I would say Fountain Central might be the favorites, but I would say watch out for Faith Christian.
Yeah, no, I agree. Fountain Central on paper, talent-wise, they're definitely the favorite. I think Central Catholic's always kind of a tough team to match up with just because of how they play. But obviously this year they're having a down year after making a state title game last year. They lost a ton of talent. But you're 100% right. Yeah, like Faith Christian, they played Fountain Central really early in the beginning of the year, and they only lost by 10 points. And then, they beat Lafayette Central Catholic already by 14 points. So I think this is probably going to come down to a Fountain Central, probably Faith Christian matchup in the sectional championship. And I would have Fountain Central winning that pretty handily.
Yeah, I would say just watch out for just make sure we are very cautious. Lafayette Central Catholic, they've had a history of making postseason runs. So yeah, it's a down year, but in the playoffs they do seem to turn it up. It's kind of like Bishop Lures to a certain extent. They always have that playoff readiness, if you would. But I would agree it's probably Fountain Central or Faith Christian for the sectional title. I'm leaning towards Fountain Central, but I can see the argument for Faith Christian there for sure. Sectional 52 hosted by Fremont. This is back to my area of the woods. This sectional to me, Mason, all year long, it feels like it has come down to Fremont and Blackhawk Christian all season long. Fremont has had a historic season. It's one of the best seasons in Fremont history. They had a massive winning streak. It was 16 consecutive wins, the longest winning streak in the history of Fremont high school basketball. They almost won the conference tournament. They lost by 8 to Eastside. They got cold in the third quarter. Foul trouble was a huge problem for Fremont. Couldn't make any shots in that game in the conference tournament championship game. And that's been the only team they've lost to all year, was to the Eastside Blazers. So Fremont has had a squad. Grace Charlotte, my turn, one of the best duos in the northern half of the state. Chloe Burton quietly having a nice year. She averaged around 9 points per game for the Fremont Eagles. Mallory Huffnagel playing some good defense for Fremont as well. It's also a veteran team. They got a lot of older kids back from the previous year when they won their second straight sectional, nearly won a regional against Elkhart Christian Academy. They've been ranked in the top half of 1A all year long. They have the squad that could potentially maybe give Marquette Catholic fits in the 1A state tournament, but they got to get past their sectional first. The draw is ideal against Lakeland Christian. They should beat Lakeland Christian. They should beat Hamilton. And I think it's going to come down to that match of Blackhawk Christian. They have size with Jalen Pickett's. They got CeCe Sefton. They got Desi Pope, who's only listed as 5'2" or 5'3", but she's one of the fastest players in the area, and she can shoot the three ball very well for Blackhawk Christian. They only lost to Fremont by 8 points this year. So Blackhawk Christian's a team to watch. They got size to combat with Fremont's speed. The biggest thing for me is, can Maya Turner stay out of foul trouble? And same for Grace Charlotte. They both average. Grace Charlotte leads the conference at 19.4 points per game. Maya Turner around 15. So they combine for about 34 of the 51 points per game. Sorry, no, not 51. They combine for 34 of the team's 57 points per game at Fremont. So I don't know about you, Mason, but I feel like that Fremont probably has the edge here. But I think the Blackhawk Christian Braves can give them a test.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's going to be the likely sectional matchup. You broke it down pretty well. Blackhawk, lost to them already this year, only by 8 points. So I think they could probably, put a scare into them a little bit. But I have, like you said, Fremont is my second best team in 1A North. I think they do end up making it past Blackhawk. I don't see them losing, a a sectional championship at home after the game they've had, or the season they've had this year.
Yeah, and when you look at the way Fremont's played, their defense, they press a lot. Their defense has been playing much better since early on in the season, so their defense has been playing very well under Shea Thomas. Charlotte, by the way, could become the program's single-season leader in points, and on a few other areas that her mom alluded to me earlier, but Grace Charlotte having a great junior season for the Fremont Eagles, and great class, as we know. Sectional 51 hosted by Oregon Davis. Culver, solid team at 14-5. Trident is a sneaky 7-win team, but I think when we look at 51, Mason, I think we got to go all the way down to that matchup between North Judson and Elkhart Christian Academy. ECA is one of the top teams in 1A. They made it all the way to semi-state last year. They're a deep team. They brought pretty much everybody back from last year, and they won the Hoosier Plains. And they're going to win the Hoosier Plains very, very easily here, but they are one of the top defensive teams in the state. They played a hard schedule for a 1A team, especially for a Hoosier Plains team. Their only two losses as of late have been East Snowball and Marquette Catholic. They lost to the number one team in the state by 11 points. And the other two losses came to St. Joe and then to the very aforementioned North Judson squad, who's built a history of solid teams of their own, led by Whitney Combs. They're also a pretty stout defensive team as well. Pretty tested team, all things considered, for North Judson. But Mason, I think it comes down to that matchup. I think whatever happens here will dictate the winner of this sectional. I think ECA is going to get the last lap in this sectional. They won it last year. They know what it takes to win the sectional. I think they get their revenge. I think I'm leaning towards the Eagles, but it's going to be a gritty defensive battle because we know ECA likes to get after a defensive.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you there. I think, like you said, North Judson, Elkhart Christian winner definitely has the upper hand in winning the sectional championship. And like you mentioned, I think that Elkhart Christian's run and experience from last year is going to help them this year. But obviously, as we've seen this year already, North Judson can beat Elkhart Christian. I don't think they'll do it again, though. And I think I'm with you with Elkhart Christian winning this sectional.
It's going to be interesting to see how that goes between these two teams. Sectional 50 hosted by North White. This sectional, again, like the last sectional, kind of feels like that first round match in the bottom half of the bracket kind of decides things for me. West Central or Tri-County feels like those are the two likely teams to win the sectional. Caston's had a decent year, but let's be honest. All due respect, I think the West Central Tri-County game is the one I think is going to be the one everybody's going to be keep an eye on in this sectional.
Yeah, I agree. I think those are probably the two best teams in the sectional. But I'm gonna go against the grain here. I'm gonna take Caston. I think they have played the toughest schedule. Per strength of schedule rankings, they've got a good draw with where they're at on the bracket. They played West Central. I think maybe their first game of the season, only lost to them by 3. I think they're, despite what we're looking at there with the results and how their season's gone, I think they're a better team than they were at that point in the season. And I'm going to go with Caston is my kind of upset pick.
All right, got our first upset special in this sectional. Caston. They've had a good schedule, so it's possible. The Hoosier North Conference has been a good conference this year, so Caston potentially could be one to watch here. I'm gonna lean towards West Central, but again, this is anybody's sectional. I think potentially on paper here. Last sectional for 1A, 49, hosted by Morgan Township, and this is one. I think that this is a very interesting sectional because you look at the top half of the bracket. Look at the teams here: Marquette Catholic, Couts, Morgan Township, Westville, all winning records. But here's the bad news, Mason. Marquette Catholic's number 1 in the state in 1A, and they got one of the top players in the state of Indiana who just scored her 2,000th career point, I believe, for the Marquette Catholic Blazers. Can you talk to me about Marquette Catholic, why they're number 1, and why do you think they are the likely favorites in the sectional?
Yeah, they can just hurt you, kind of in so many different ways. And, it kind of starts, they've got a couple kids who can really score the ball. Lania Davis, Addison and Marissa both can, kind of do whatever, against 1A competition. But Couts, isn't going to go down lightly. They've got some really good players on that team as well. I just think Marquette Catholic is, so much better with their top 3 and 4 players right now. They already beat them by, I think it was 30 points early this season. And I just don't think that there's going to be many teams standing in Marquette Catholic's way. They're senior laden. They've got some freshmen that contribute here and there, but I just don't think that I see anyone getting in their way. And again, we have an unfortunate circumstance of the likely two best teams in a 1A sectional meeting in the opening round. So I think that's going to kind of dim the allure a little bit of the sectional. But I mean, as we can see by the records, that second round game's not going to be easy either for whoever wins that game between Marquette and Couts. Morgan Township and Westville, have played really good basketball this year. I just feel bad for, whoever's on the bottom side of that bracket who's going to be standing in whichever of those four teams' way makes it there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the top half of the bracket is certainly the most competitive for sure. I like Marquette Catholic just because I've seen them play a little bit, and then you've seen them play as well, and they're definitely one of the more talented teams in 1A. We go to 2A. We go in the South, Section 48, hosted by Tell City, and this sectional, relatively a balanced sectional. I'm not entirely sure who comes out of this sectional, but I mean, Evansville Modern Day's had a history of success. Forest Park has had some recent success as well. I'm kind of looking at that matchup there. Maybe that's the one that dictates how the sectional goes, but I think you can make a case for maybe one or two other teams to potentially win 48.
Yeah, this one's actually going to be kind of interesting. If you can click on South Spencer's schedule right there. So they got a transfer in, Riley Canan from Evansville Memorial here in January. And if you can see their schedule there, like they're a completely different team, in January once she transferred in and was able to play than they were prior to that. They have a really tough test against Washington coming up here. So that'll tell us, a lot about what they are right now. They had a really good win against Evansville Christian, and they're winning games with their defense. And so, yeah, this sectional is going to be really interesting just because of that transfer in. I don't think that, you can really look at the first half of their schedule and say, okay, this is the team that, South Spencer is, because it's really not, because she joined some really solid seniors and juniors in that group. Mater Dei has been really good this year. They've had some really, really nice wins. They had a little bit of a slow start there in the middle December, early December. But since then they've kind of been on a run. They just beat Evansville Central. I saw them play Evansville North down south in Evansville this year in a little bit of a tournament. They beat them, so they're beating some 4A and 3A teams. So it's really going to be, really tough, I think, to probably upend them. And even there on December 6th, they beat Roncalli, who I currently have as I think even number one team in 3A right now, because they're just beating everyone. So how much can you draw from a game, 2 months ago? I don't know. But this one's going to be really fun. I'm going to go with Mater Dei just because I think they're probably the best team, but I would not be surprised whatsoever if South Spencer wins this. And I would not be surprised whatsoever if Forest Park ends up, like you said, beating Mater Dei just because of their history of success they've had, in the tournament the last, dozen or so years.
Yeah, I think the bottom half of the bracket is the one I'm certainly going to be intrigued to see who comes out of that side of the bracket for sure. There's some good teams there. Section 47 hosted by Eastern Green. And right away, Mason, the Knottses are the story once again. South Knots won the state championship last year. We know what happened. We said that matchup between South and North Knots was going to dictate how 2A was going to go the rest of the way. And lo and behold, Mason, South Knots won the whole thing.
Yeah.
Can you tell me why South Knots would be favored again in this sectional? And does North Knots maybe make this a little bit of a scare? Maybe Linton Stockton, maybe?
Maybe. I mean, maybe. I think, again, it's North Knox, South Knox. For North Knox, you've got Bailey McKiller, who's a really solid guard. And then obviously you've got Lexi Primus for North Knox, who's their Division I commit, one of the top seniors in the state. And they've had a really solid year. Obviously the record's 15-5, but they've played a really tough schedule. They don't just sit there in the South and play teams down there. You can see they've played Evansville Central, one of the top teams in 3A. They've played Silver Creek, one of the top teams in 3A. They've played Brownsburg, who, despite beating them by 40, you can't really knock that because Brownsburg, it's Brownsburg, and you're a 2A team going up north to play them. And then they beat Washington earlier this year. But I go back to head-to-head, and South Knox has already beat them. They have Kendall Hill, who's one of the best juniors in the state. Grace Detweiler's, right there with her as one of the best juniors in the state. Madison Parrish, really good, kind of do-it-all wing for them. It's really tough to get a great read on teams when you're just blowing teams out because there's not much you can learn from those games. But I was at that Northeastern and Connorsville game there on the 29th, both of those games. And South Knox, kind of ran into a buzzsaw in Connorsville. But then that lapel game, was a really good win for them. This might make some people not happy because I don't think I'm in the great graces of North Knox fans, but I can't pick against South Knox. I think they're the best team in the sectional. Don't hate me if I'm wrong, but I got to go with South Knox.
I mean, they are the defending state champions for a reason, but as you know, when you have that big target on your back, those rival teams can have that sense of motivation. So don't be surprised if it is North Knox, but I mean, I think South Knox would be seen as the favorites just because I don't think they lost too much of step from last year, really, to be honest with you. And frankly, they're still quite a good basketball team. So I think it's going to come down to one of those two teams either way. Sectional 46, hosted by Eastern Pekin. And in this sectional, Crawford County, 14-7. We know what type of schedule Lanesville has played over the years. Eastern Pekin, 14-6, solid team, great history there. And then I have to mention Providence because I've seen this narrative before with Providence. You look at that 11-8 record, you think, okay, they're not the best team in that sectional. But Providence, they always play a pretty bulky schedule. And so it's kind of hard to read on Providence just based on records alone. If I got picked a team that maybe could win this sectional, I would go on a limb and say maybe this is Providence, but I could see an argument for Eastern Pekin as well.
No, I think you're spot on. I think Providence, I think they always have, a record that you look at and you think, oh, maybe they're not that good. But then if you just look at, who they've played, like, their losses aren't bad losses whatsoever. Just looking at that, Brownstown Central, they lost to them in double overtime. Crawford County, they lost to them in double overtime. Two of the better teams in 2A. Jeffersonville, Bloomington North. Like, I'm not going to really ever knock a 2A team for losing to a 4A team. And then for those of you who don't know out-of-state basketball, Pleasure Ridge Park, Owensboro Catholic, and Ballard out of Louisville, those are all three pretty good teams from Kentucky. So those aren't, losses where they go down there and lose to a bad team. Those are pretty good teams who would compete, probably as top 10 teams in the state of Indiana. So, yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I think Providence gets it done. I could see Eastern Pekin, making a charge at them. They're on the sectional semifinal, but I think Providence is the team here to beat.
All right. That's fascinating. Sectional 45 hosted by Austin. And we know Austin's had some good teams over years. This sectional is pretty darn balanced. Although Austin, I think, got the better of the draw here because they get the weaker matchup of the bunch here. But you got Southwestern 15-6, South Ripley 15-7. We know the type of resume Brownstown Central has built over the years. They have been a perennial power in Class 2A for so long now. I cannot tell you how long they've always been good in 2A South and whatnot. If I got to pick a team that possibly wins this sectional, I kind of feel like it's going to be the team that's had the resume, and that's Brownstown Central.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think they're the best team in the sectional. It's fortunate for Austin they got the draw that they did. They avoid both Brownstown Central and Southwestern Hanover. So I personally could pencil in Austin in the sectional championship. But I do think Brownstown Central meets Austin once again in the sectional championship. It's going to be a little bit different of a game than last year. I think both teams, are missing some players from, that graduated from last year. But I'm going to go with Brownstown. They have played two of these teams already in sectional. They played Southwestern, beat them by 12. They played Austin, escaped from them by 1. So they've already beaten both of the two other best teams in the sectional. So I think Brownstown Central is going to do it again and make it to regionals.
All right. Sectional 44 hosted by Hagerstown. And you look at this sectional here, Northeastern has built themselves quite a power. They're going to be departing to a brand new conference next year, and so Northeastern's kind of been preparing that as well. Shenandoah is also going to the new conference. Those two are probably two of the better teams in this sectional here. Mason, I think when we look back to this sectional once again, I mean, Northeastern's getting hot at the right time. They had that midseason skid in December, but look at the teams they played during that stretch here, and I think to myself, Northeastern's probably the more battle-tested team. They're probably the one that I think is best suited for a run in the state tournament. It's in their side of the bracket and whatnot. I like Northeastern in this section.
Yeah, I agree. Addie Kircher for Northeastern, a senior, Gary Gammon, Fiona Breitenbach. I can't really pick against talent. I think Northeastern has the most talent. They're 5-0 against sectional opponents, so they've beat everyone already. So I'm not going to pick against them. I'm going to go with Northeastern.
All right, that sounds simple enough. We go to sectional 43, hosted by Heritage Christian. And again, I mentioned this earlier, Heritage Christian has built the resume of being a powerhouse. Trident Central has built themselves quite nicely to be a powerhouse as well. But then you get Eastern Hancock. You hinted them earlier in the 1A discussion. Eastern Hancock has built quite the powerhouse as well. And you look at those three teams and you ask, it's probably going to come down to one of those three teams. Heritage Christian is always a tricky one because they always play the hardest schedule. You don't know what to expect with Heritage Christian in the playoffs. But if there's another team that possibly could make this interesting, potentially in the sectional, you could possibly look at maybe Trident Central or Eastern Hancock in this case.
Yeah, I think this one's kind of a weird sectional for me because I remember this one last year being, like 5 teams, and I think Trident Central was one of the worst ones on paper, and I picked them to win, and then they won it. This year, I think it could almost be the same. I think Trident Central, Heritage Christian, Eastern Hancock, are all very similar teams. I wouldn't be surprised if any of them win. I think Trident Central probably has the upper hand. Heritage Christian definitely has the easier path to the sectional championship, but it's going to be, a group of teams who have one, player who's really good. Heritage Christian has sophomore Riley Johnson. Trident Central has senior Mario Spelling, and then Eastern Hancock obviously has a Ball State commit junior Kinsey Cook. So it's going to be, out of those 3 players, who plays the best? And I'm going to go with Trident Central again in this one. I think, like you said, Heritage Christian definitely has played the tougher schedule this year. Trident Central got off to a rocky start to the beginning of the year. I actually went and watched them play that Eastern Hancock game early in the year, and I did not leave thinking that Eastern Hancock, despite the win, was the better team in that matchup. So I think Trident Central is gonna take this one. I think that Heritage Christian game, obviously, as we can see here, they lost to them already this year at Heritage Christian. I think that's going to be a really good sectional championship game if it does end up being that one. And I think Trident Central reverses the decision here and takes the win for the sectional championship.
For the sake of being different, I'm just going to take Heritage Christian just to be different, but I probably agree that it's going to be a good sectional nonetheless. Sectional 42, hosted by Park Tudor. This reverts back to some of the talk from 1A. This feels like a one-sided sectional, in my opinion. I think it's going to be Monrovia, but maybe you can make an argument for University, but I'm kind of going Monrovia here.
Yeah, so I think Monrovia makes it. I think Monrovia wins this sectional as well. But I would be wary of Covenant Christian. Monrovia only beat them by 4 earlier this year. Covenant Christian only beat University by 3. I think Covenant University are both pretty solid teams. I think Monrovia, is the best team though, and I think they end up, kind of putting it all together and winning the sectional. But I would not be surprised if the winner comes from that bottom half of the bracket.
That's why I came in with a little bit of caution with that sectional as well. Sectional 41, hosted by South Putnam. Bottom half of the bracket, it's very enticing. Park Heritage and Southmont. I think that's going to be the sectional championship game for me, in my opinion. I could see an argument for either side. I really am starting to figure out who even wins this one, to be honest with you. I think you can make a case for either of these two teams. Maybe you can make an argument for North Putnam as well.
Yeah, I think, like you just said on the onset, I think the sectional championship essentially is Park Heritage for Southmont there in that first game. Park Heritage just played Southmont, I think it was 2 weeks ago, and Park Heritage beat them in that game by 6. So I do think it's kind of a toss-up as to who wins. I think Southmont probably has the better singular player, but I think Park Heritage probably is a better team. Although Southmont's system of their little trap that they run, their full court trap, is hard to break. So if those Park Heritage guards aren't on, their game, they could definitely lose this game. But I am rooting personally for chaos. I'm hoping South Vermilion wins in the sectional semifinal to go to the state championships or to go to the sectional championship, since they haven't won a game since January 27th of 2022.
Fascinating. We hope for the best for South Vermilion. I remember what it was like when Blackford men were struggling to win games 10 years ago. They had like a 69 game losing streak or something like that. So, boy, we're hoping the same for South Vermilion to get out of that losing skid and whatnot. Sectional 40, hosted by Wapahani. This is a little bit more towards my area of the woods. I do cover the Marion area schools this time around. You look at this sectional, Eastbrook and Wapahani, they met earlier this year, and that was an upset win for Eastbrook. And they've had a really young team under Alicia Griffin. Her daughter, Alexa Griffin, is one of the star players on this team, but they got off to such a rocky start. But ever since the new year, they've only lost 3 games since the new year. So that means they have won, 6 of the last 9 games. So they're coming in a little hot going into the state tournament for the Eastbrook Panthers. And you got the Kalalia Reason with 16 points and 20 rebounds against Madison Grant. So I think they have a shot of repeating their success against Wapahani in the first round. I can even see Eastbrook get all the way to the sectional finals. I know they got a middle school group coming in that's got a nice future with Eastbrook. So they're building a good culture once again for Eastbrook. But I'm going to be honest with you, Mason. This is Alexandria's sectional to lose. They have a squad this year. Yeah, you think they graduated Jacqueline Hosier. Alexandria's going to rebuild. Alexandria's going to rebuild. No. They're wiping the floor against most of their competition, and they're doing so without a star player. They're doing it through a balanced lineup, playing good press defense and playing stifling defense under Mickey Hosier, who just picked up 100 wins earlier this year for Alexandria. And they're going to be playing Oak Hill Thursday. It's going to be a good test to see what Alexandria looks like going to the state tournament, whatnot, between 2 good CIC foes. But I'm going to be honest with you, Mason, this is Alexandria sectional.
Yeah, completely agree. Like you said, I'm a little surprised they're as good as they are this year after losing Jacqueline. But there's something to be said for getting kids to buy in and play a press defense against, a bunch of kids who can't really handle the ball that well. You're going to win a ton of games. You're going to win them by large margins. You're going to score a lot of points. It's interesting to me to see how this Oak Hill game goes, because while, Alexandria is 18-3, they haven't necessarily beat a ton of really good teams yet. Their 3 losses are to teams who, kind of are at their same level or a little bit above their level. But yeah, I don't think that changes my decision or opinion on them. I think they're going to have, their way with any team in the sectional. I think they're going to make it to regional. And I think it's, depending on who they play in regional, I think it's going to be, I think they could be looking at another state or a semi-state run.
Very, very possible for Alexandria in 2A, which is going to be an interesting matchup. By the way, I will be previewing Alexandria Oak Hill for the AAC of the week. So keep an eye on that. Sectional 39, hosted by LaPel. Here's another team that's having a season everybody's talking about, and that's LaPel and Lanaya Wills. The Butler commits. Lanaya Wills, one of the top players in all of Indiana, coming from LaPel in Madison County, right? Sorry, not Madison County, but it's in Anderson, Indiana. They're going to be drawing Sheridan in the first round of sectionals. Could be a trap game for LaPel, but I would say when you look at this sectional, this is LaPel's sectional to lose.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cut and dry. I think LaPel's the heavy favorite. If they lose, it's an upset, and I'm a silly person for picking LaPel, but LaPel's going to win this sectional.
One thing to note on the top half of the bracket, Elwood's got a solid junior in Breland Norris, who's averaging around 20 points per game. I believe she's around 19 points away from 1,000 career points for Elwood. If there's a team that could make a run to the sectional finals, it could be Elwood, but I agree with you. I think it's LaPel all the way. Sectional 38, hosted by Wabash. This is part of my area of the woods. We mentioned Oak Hill a couple sectionals ago. They're the team I think is the favorite to win the sectional. They beat Lewis Casper just about, a month ago, I believe it was, January 6th, almost a month ago. And that was a weird game, Mason, because Oak Hill was up by, I think, almost 20 points in the first quarter. And then it went down to single digits, and then Oak Hill pulled away by 17 points. They're not winning games by scoring a bunch of points on opponents. They're scoring through their defense, that zone defense, and through their size of Brianna Daly, who's been a really good player for Oak Hill, averaging 16 points per game, second in the CIC, trailing only to Breland Norris of Elwood. So Oak Hill, kind of like Alexandria, they playing with a lot of nice athletes, but they're not big name players in the basketball landscape of things. They've only lost twice this year. That came way back in November against two worthy opponents in LaPel and Northfield. So they have had the resume in this sectional. Lewis Cass will be interesting because they always run that zone defense for Lewis Cass, and that always seems to throw people off with the way Cass runs their defense. But it's kind of, we don't know what to expect with Lewis Cass in the playoffs because their offense can go hot and cold sometimes. Manchester, Rochester could be an interesting first-round matchup, but I think Oak Hill cruises to the sectional championship game, and I think we're likely going to see Oak Hill versus Lewis Cass to decide the sectional Wabash.
Yep, nothing more to add there. I agree. I think Oak Hill's pretty solid. They've won 15 or 16 games in a row. They're beating everyone they play. I think this is no different, and I think they're going to end up as the sectional championship victor, as you said, against Lewis Cass.
All right. Take a look at sectional 37, hosted by Benton Central. Rensselaer Central, they made it all the way to state last year, and we know what that team did. They tore Eastside apart last year in the semi-state championship game. We kind of expect Rensselaer Central to make somewhat of a similar run this year in 2A North. But watch out for a couple of teams in the bottom half of the bracket with Delphi and Benton Central. I think those are two intriguing teams to watch. I mean, when you look at Rensselaer Central's schedule there, they only beat Benton Central by 6 points earlier this year. So, I mean, if there's one team that could knock off Rensselaer Central in their quest to make another run back to state, it could potentially be Benton Central.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Benton Central definitely has the best chance to win a game in the sectional, especially since it's at Benton Central. But I think Rensselaer Central with Cammie Rowland, Brody Radke, and then junior Courtney Matthew, who just committed to Illinois State, I think they're just really, really good. I think they're just really good team. If you look at their schedule, their losses have been twice to McCutcheon, and then once to Lafayette Jeff. So their only losses are to 4A schools. And then as we're looking here at Benton Central's schedule, they've lost to McCutcheon as well. Kankakee Valley is a solid program. Faith Christian's a solid 1A team. And then they, obviously they got beat pretty badly by McCutcheon, but McCutcheon does that to a lot of teams, who are 1A and 2A programs. So I could, definitely see Benton Central making a run here, but I think it's going to be Rensselaer Central, and I think they've got another deep run in them this year, actually.
You know what? I'm going to go the upset. I'm going to go Benton Central just because of the being home. I think it's going to be interesting because Rensselaer Central got a really good basketball team, but Benton Central, I don't know, for some reason, every time I think I overlook that team, they surprise me. So I'm going to lean towards Benton Central, but I can see either of those two teams winning that sectional. Sectional 36 at Woodland. Last year when we talked about this sectional, we thought Bluffton was going to run away in the sectional, but then Whitco comes along and they pulled off the upset. They did something I didn't think they'd be able to do against Bluffton, and that's be able to shoot the three ball against Bluffton's defense, and they did so. And they made it all the way to the Elite Eight last year. I know that loss is in the minds of Doug Curtis and the Bluffton Tigers, who, yes, they're 17-5, but they have basically had to retool the roster now, where their offense has kind of been going around Conley Alt this year, where last year it was mainly Isabella Stout. Alt's averaging 20 points per game, leading the ACAC. But when you look at the way they've been playing since the conference tournament, they have been red hot as of late for the Bluffton Tigers. They won their second straight ACAC tournament with Conley Alt. Chloe did starting to hit the three ball really well. She had I think it was 7 threes against Eastbrook just last week. And then you got Sophie Eisenhut's an underrated center for them. And you got the Eden Nash, the Norwell transfer. Really good defense, shuts down some of the best players on their scouting report right now and whatnot for Bluffton. They're going to score points on Doug Curtis. That's kind of always been that way for him. The problem with Bluffton is they got a pretty bad draw. They're going to have to face the winner of Whitco Woodland. Woodland's 12-7, but Woodland's kind of been streaky this year. There have been some games where Woodland's played really well under Dave Randall, but they only shoot 20% or less from three this year. They have a hard time making their threes, which is part of the reason why they struggled badly against J. Cal in the ACAC tournament after beating them in the regular season by only 2 points. So it all comes down to what Woodland team you're going to see on any given night, and can they catch Whitco on an off game? Whitco's 20-1. They look better than last year, Mason. They have a transfer from South Bend, Washington, Kyler Lowe, really solidifying that back row. Reese Stonebreaker. Jameis Stonebreaker seems to pick up per game. And you got Allie Brown, the post, playing well as well. Whitco's deep. And if you know anything about Whitco, they're going to run that fast tempo offense. They're going to press like crazy, and they're going to take a lot of threes. That's what Whitco's known for. And I think their defense has gotten even better this year, Mason, which is crazy to even say that about the Whitco Wildcats. So if they can hit their threes, and be able to play good defense, they got a squad that I think could get all the way to the state finals, which is hard to even imagine that even 5 years ago with the Whitco Wildcats. But I will say this with caution. Woodlands plays a type of half-court offense that can slow the game down, so that's something to worry about here. But then Bluffton, because of the talent they have and some of the size of Bluffton, could cause Whitco some trouble. So it's very possible we could see the reverse effects from last year. However, I like Whitco a lot. They are definitely a squad. They have dominated the season so far for their schedule. They beat Northrop twice, which is saying a lot about the Whitco Wildcats this year. They got a squad that can compete with the best in 2A.
Yeah, I don't think I can pick anyone but Whitco in this one. I think they're by far the best team on paper here. I think that they could be upset by Bluffton or Woodland, but I think they just have too much. And plus, if I picked against them, I don't want to get any DMs from you asking me why I didn't pick Whitco. So I'm going to go with Whitco. Like you said, I think they're one of the better teams in 2A, and so I think they win this sectional.
Long story short, we've had a long discussion about which team is better, Whitco or the team we'll talk about later, and that's Bremen. And Bremen's another one that we'll talk about. They are definitely a solid team in 2A as well. 2A 35 is at Lakeland, the all-NECC sweepstakes. And Mason, I'm just going to be honest with you. I know Eastside's the favorite, but I don't think they are quite as good as last year. Yes, they graduate some talented kids, but they've had to kind of retool a little bit. Still a great team. They played good defense once again. Taylor Matt's having a great season, averaging 18 points per game. She has really picked up her game this year. Lucy Kitchen as a point guard for this team. Adley Eldon has quietly had a nice year as they're kind of their stretch big for the Eastside Blazers. And then some kids like Payne Ricasa have stepped up in big moments like they did in the conference tournament where Eastside won their third straight NECC tournament here. But Eastside got a pretty good draw. Westview's banged up right now. They are without their point guard in Olivia Bontrader. So I wouldn't be surprised if Prairie Heights beats Westview in the first round, because if Olivia Bontrader isn't back healthy, Westview's a completely different team without her, because it makes Bree Corey because it forces too much pressure on Bree Corey and whatnot. So they really need Olivia Bontrader back for Westview. Central Noble's a team to watch out, however. They are 9-11, but when you look at their schedule, look at the games they've lost, and look how close some of those games were. I mean, they lost to Westview in a buzzer-beating 3. And goal, they went on a 12-0 run to take the lead for good in that game. Fremont went on a 10-2 run to take the lead for good in the third quarter. They led Fairfield by 4 with about 3 minutes to go. Fairfield won a run to win by 4. Eastside won by only 3 points. So understand, like Central Noble, if they can ever put 4 quarters of basketball together with the freshman of Jaylee Sloan, one of the top bigs in the area as a sophomore. Cadence Bales is a really good junior for this team. Grace Swank, their senior center. If they can get that together, that's the thing that makes Central Noble a tough team to play against. So they are going to be tough defensively, and they have some size. But the problem with Central Noble is they are playing a freshman point guard. And that is a big concern when you're playing its Eastside, that 1-3-1. Eastside is known for that defensive structure they play in the switching defense. I think that's a problem once again. So while they may make this a test for Eastside, I still think the Blazers are the favorites.
Yeah, I'm gonna go against you here. I think I'm gonna go with Central Noble, just to be an opposite here. They just lost to Eastside only by 3 points. They're playing some pretty solid basketball despite what the results are showing. Kind of as you showed. I think they get over the hump, and I think they beat Eastside in the most likely sectional championship match we have.
Yeah, I mean, these two have met so much in the last 3 years. I think every year, except this year, they've met 3 times. So they know each other a lot. They know the book about each other and whatnot. So it wouldn't be surprising if it's Central Noble. But I think Eastside, with the deep run they've had last year, they still got that momentum from last year. I still like Eastside to win the sectional. Sectional 34, hosted by LaVille. And this is probably one of the most predictable sectionals I could come up with here. And I'm just going to be completely honest with you, Mason. I'm going to be very short with you. Bremen's got 2 really good players in Emma Kincaid and what's her name again? I'm sorry. Eliana Grubbs. There we go. 2 1,000-point scores for Bremen. They're big. They're physical. Coach Robinson's got a really good team that runs a good defense. They're a veteran team. They've made it to deep runs in the past. They went to semi-stages 2 years ago in 3A. They are the team that's probably best suited to make a run from this sectional. I like Bremen going away.
I do too. It's really tough to stop a team when you've got two really good seniors and are already on paper and by the eye test the best team. I don't think Bremen has much of an issue here.
Yep. Last sectional 2A, 33 hosted by Wheeler, and in this sectional, I'm going to be honest with you, Mason. This feels like Andrean's sectional.
I agree. I think you can kind of throw records out the window when you're looking at Andrean because they generally play a very tough schedule with a bunch of 3A and 4A teams. So their schedule is always going to be, or their record's always going to be much worse than they are because they're playing, much more talented teams than anyone else in 2A and specifically this sectional. Just to cut this one short, I think Andrean is the team to beat here, despite having a 7-12 record. But I think that they, win this one pretty easily. The only team that could maybe trip them up a little bit is Wheeler, since it's at home. But I don't see that happening.
Just to put in context, last year, Andrean, I think, had a similar record. They went to regionals. They only lost to Eastside by 12 points. And that's the Eastside team that only lost 2 games all last year. So Andrean is definitely the tested team here. I wouldn't look too much in those records. Looking at 3A, we begin with 32, hosted by Evansville Sectional. This is where things get interesting because 3A's got a lot of good teams here in 3A, and it's going to be more interesting now than ever before. But looking at the bottom half of the bracket, I think the one to watch is that bottom half of the bracket, Heritage Hills, Evansville Central. I feel like, to me, this is Heritage Hills' sectional to lose, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go the opposite. I think it's Evansville Central's to lose. They've played a top 30 schedule in the state. Their record is not as good as they are on paper, because if you see the little schedule, and they played Washington, South Knox, Boonville. So Maddie Shirley actually got hurt, and that's their Southern Indiana commit, who's kind of their do-it-all player. So she got hurt. They lost those 4 games without her. She wasn't 100%. And then their other losses since then have been to Warsaw, who obviously is, they're a pretty good team. Evansville Wrights, who's pretty solid. Evansville North, pretty solid. And then Hamilton Southeastern, who's one of the best teams in the state. And then their other loss with Shirley was to Carmel by 1 in overtime. So they've played a much tougher schedule than anyone. On paper, I think they're probably the favorite. I think Heritage Hills is good, and they could cause a little bit of issues for a team like Central, cause with Mia Becker and Isla Kress. But I just think Maddie Shirley is not going to allow her team to lose in sectional when it's at Evansville Central. So my pick's Evansville Central, and I would honestly be a little surprised if they don't win. But it's unfortunate that all 3 of the 3 best teams in that sectional are on the bottom half. So whoever makes it to the sectional championship has a really, really good chance to win it.
That is for sure. Sectional 31, hosted by Vincennes Lincoln. I think this is a pretty balanced sectional. Aside from maybe Vincennes Lincoln, the host itself, their schedule's been pretty tested as well. But I mean, Princeton, I think, has a pretty decent run to the championship game. But you look at that bottom half of the bracket, Jasper and Washington, boy, that is going to be a heck of a matchup on February 3rd down in Vincennes. I think the winner of the game, I think, maybe wins this whole thing.
Yeah, I agree. I have Washington winning this one. I think they're a little bit better than Princeton. I think Princeton's solid, but I can't really bet against London Gilly, Katie Reed, Ella Williams, Shay Hawk, Kyra Shuckman. Like, Washington has 5 3A caliber starters, and you can't really say that for a lot of 3A teams. A lot of teams have 2 or 3 kids who are pretty good. Washington has 5. Now, they don't have much of a bench whatsoever. So if they stay out of foul trouble and are injury free, which I think they finally are right now, they're going to be a tough out in the tournament for sure. So I have Washington, but like you said, I think Princeton could put a little scare into them there. Or Jasper could put a little bit of a scare into them there in that first round.
Yeah, I think it could be either of those two teams right there in that first round. Could be fascinating. Sectional 30, hosted by Charlestown. You mentioned Silver Creek earlier being one of the top teams in 3A. You got Charlestown at 19-3 as well. Madison 16-5. Is it the host Charlestown taking the sectional, or does a team like Silver Creek maybe potentially knock them off? Because I'm going to be honest with you, I would probably lean towards Silver Creek in my opinion, but I could possibly see maybe one of the other two teams I mentioned earlier possibly make a run at this.
Yeah, so just starting from the bottom, Corrigan Central isn't, on the level that they have been in the past. So I think Madison pretty easily comes out of that half of the sectional. They've been playing really, really well this year, kind of surprisingly so. But they've been really good. They beat Corrigan Central already by 24 points. But they have lost to Charlestown, who's on the top half of the bracket, by 4 this year, and they've also lost to Silver Creek by 6. So they kind of have that working against them. As far as Silver Creek goes, I think they're definitely one of the most talented teams in the state. With Kansas commit Brooklyn Wren, who's one of the best seniors in the state. Emma Shane going to Vermont, also a senior. Emily Robeson, who's really solid junior guard, and then Jocelyn Chesser, who is a really solid post down low. Silver Creek kind of been a tough team to peg this year just because, they kind of have a good run and they lose a couple weird games. And then they have a good run and then they lose a weird game. Like that Columbus North game. They lost by 16. They're probably better than Columbus North, but they still lost that game. Castle, they probably should have beat Castle. So I think anything can really happen. And with it being at Charlestown, I think that even throws a little bit bigger of a wrench in the fact, because Charlestown, they're really good this year, and they're young too. Chesney Jackson's a junior, Alexis Fincham's a junior, Madeline Warnock's a junior. So I think it might be a case of Silver Creek and their seniors winning out. I'm going to go with Silver Creek, but I think Charlestown has a real shot, a real shot to beat them. And then once they get to the sectional finals, whoever plays Madison, that's not going to be a gimme game either. Like these three teams will all play each other. All have been within 10 points. But I'm just going to go with the best player. I always go with the best players. The best players are on Silver Creek's team, so I'm going with Silver Creek.
Yeah, I think it's going to be one of those three teams for sure. It feels like it's going to be one of the better sectionals in 3A. Sectional 29, hosted by Franklin County. Jennings County, they are one of only two teams that knocked off Warsaw this year. The number one overall team to stay, at least at one point they were. Now I don't know if they are anymore. Greensburg, however, not as good as last year, but kind of taking the Norwell, Columbia City footprint. They take their lumps early on and then build as the season goes along. So I think you look at those two teams, Mason, Jennings County and Greensburg, I think it's a crash course of maybe having one of the better sectional championship games possibly on paper.
Yeah, for sure. I think you're spot on. It's going to be a Greensburg, Jennings County, and if it's anything other than that, it's going to be kind of an upset. Greensburg just has so much talent with Claire Larison, a junior who's committed to Ball State, Allie Powers, Mary Harmon as seniors. You've got some sophomores and some freshmen that really contribute well there too. And then for Jennings County, you have Kansas commit Molly Ernstis, Etta Young, and then Anderson Kent. Jennings County is kind of a weird team to me because, as you've said, they're really up and down. It's really they perform based on how Molly Ernstis performs. If she plays really well, they're going to win. If she does not play very well, they're going to lose. As we can see there, they beat Warsaw. Molly Ernstis had 30-something points that game. The game before that, they lost to Cathedral, and then they've lost to Borden, which, not a bad loss at all. Borden's really good, but still, as a 3A team who's a top 10 team in the state, you shouldn't be losing to 1A teams. Then they lost to Franklin. I was at that game. That was a case where Franklin was actually up by 15 or 16 points before Molly Ernstis started kind of getting going. They lost to Greensburg already this year by 13. Claire Larison's a really tough matchup for her. Allie Powers is a really tough matchup for her just because they have length, athleticism, and can really stay in front of her. And so I think this is, like you said, it's a Jennings County, Greensburg crash course. I've been high on Greensburg. I think Greensburg's just a little bit better than them. But as we've seen, Jennings County could beat anyone in the state. They have a win over Warsaw, who's, on everyone's radar as a top, at minimum 4 team in the state, and however you want to rank them. Some people have them number 1. I personally don't. It's been a long thing. But they beat them. So I'm going to go with Greensburg, though. I think they've got more pieces. I think they can defend Molly Ernstis. But it would not be a shock for me to see on John Harrell's site that Jennings County ends up winning that sectional.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm going to go Greensburg as well. I love this team since last year, and they definitely have a squad to get to possibly win the whole thing. Kind of like what Norwell did last year when they had that loss the previous year, and then they won the whole thing the very next year. Sectional 28 hosted by Rushville. This is a tough one for me because I look at Ron County and thinking they're the favorites, but then I look down and there's New Pal there. I know how New Pal is in basketball over the years, so that one could be tricky with this sectional. I'm leaning towards Ron County just because I think they are the better team in general, but I think there's a couple teams that could possibly knock them off.
Yeah, for sure. I have Roncalli, I think, is number 1 team in the state right now in 3A. And that's almost more so a product of them just continuously winning and being on a crazy streak as of late than it is of them, I think, being probably the top team in the state. There, as you can see, they just beat New Pal. They've beaten Greensburg. They beat Franklin Central. They beat Chittard. They beat Danville. They only lost to Pike by 20, which, only losing by Pike by 20 is a pretty good result. They beat Lawrence Central. And Roncalli is an interesting team because they aren't a team that has, a star or 2 stars. They're very well balanced, in how they play. They're all guards. They don't really have a post player. Elliot Leffler is their de facto post, essentially. Brenna Cerny's really good, but they don't, really have any post players. So, a team like New Pal could give them, a little bit of run for their money. But as we saw that Roncalli had already beat them this year, I think Shelbyville and Indian Creek could provide a little bit of noise in the sectional, but I do think it's Roncalli's, to lose. And I personally don't see anyone beating them. I think they're well prepared.
All right, that should be fascinating. Sectional 27 hosted by Edgewood. Got Edgewood 13 wins, Cascade 12 wins, Owen Valley's at 13, Northfield's at 15, Speedway at 10. It kind of feels like a toss-up, Mason.
Yeah, I think you're pretty much on target there. I think Northview is probably the best team in the state, or not best team in the state, best team in the sectional. They've played a tougher schedule than anyone else. A lot of these teams where they're at in the state, they do play a lot of 1A and 2A local teams to kind of inflate their record just a little bit. And Northview does that too, just a little bit based, but that's kind of just based on where you're at and, teams you have to play. They did lose to Edgewood already this year once, which is kind of a little bit of a surprise because you wouldn't think Edgewood is, even the second best team in this sectional, but it is really toss up, like you said. And Edgewood being at home makes me kind of want to pick them, but I do think Northview is probably the best team in the sectional, so I'm going to go ahead and pick Northview.
All right, I can possibly see that. I mean, Edgewood definitely has a solid team. They've been playing better basketball of late as well. I could possibly see even Owen Valley even win the sectional as well. So it's just that much of a toss up in the sectional for sure. Sectional 26 hosted by Indianapolis, Shortridge, and you got Shortridge, Chittard, Cathedral, Edgewood. I'm gonna be honest with you. I think Chittard and Cathedral are very much the contenders in the sectional. And I mean, you can make an argument for either of those two teams. I'm going to lean towards Cathedral in this case.
Yeah, I agree. Cathedral's kind of been on a huge roll as of late. They do this every single year to us. They start out and they play really bad the first 2 or 3 weeks of the season. And then they catch fire and just win every single game they play. I start out with my poll. I have Cathedral ranked in the bottom half of the top 10, and then they lose 4 of their first 7 games, and then they win 7 of their next 7 games against 4A and 3A competition, and then I have to stick them back on there at 10-6 or whatever. I think they are the best team in the state. They've got, really good talent. They've got, um, young talent as well, and who are really, really gelling together right now. And I think this is Cathedral's to lose. Although I do think Chittard can provide, a little bit of resistance, and I do think Inglewood there. I saw them play Charlestown. They probably should have beat Charlestown earlier this year over in Richmond in that tournament. I think they are a very, very upset oriented team. They've got a ton of athletes on that team. They've got good post players on that team. They can shoot the ball really well. So that's a team, and that's going to be a matchup, Cathedral Inglewood. That's going to be a really fun matchup. But I'm with you. I think Cathedral, based on how they've been playing the last 2 months, is going to run away with this one.
And just worthy enough for Cathedral, head coach for them is a Huntington North grad in Lisa Finn, who was part of one of the 2 state championship teams in Huntington North. So sectional 25, hosted by Lebanon. You look at this sectional here. I think this is kind of I'm going to be honest, it might be kind of a crapshoot for me, but I'm probably going either Garin Catholic or Brebeuf Jesuit here.
Yeah, no, I'm completely on board with that. I think the 2 best teams in here are Garin and Brebeuf. It's unfortunate, once again, they meet in the first round, but, Brebeuf with Jalen Bowling, Robin Pate, Audra Kendall have been pretty solid this year. They're another team where the record doesn't really match what they are on the court because they play a really good schedule. And then, Garin Catholic is a really young team. Like, they're really young. They start, I think it's 3 freshmen, Emerson French, Laura Grace Rockwood, and Cecilia Titus. And then Rachel Burley is also a really solid sophomore. So this is going to be a really good learning experience for Garin Catholic, win or lose, because I think they're really well set up for the future. But I do think and agree with you that the winner comes from that Garin-Brebeuf matchup, and I think it's going to be Garin.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Sectional 24 hosted by Yorktown. I don't want to spend too much time here, but because we got some good sectionals here. But this sectional, every year, this sectional has always been difficult because you don't know what's going to come out of this sectional. Jay County Newcastle is a tough first round matchup. I've watched Jay County play a couple times, and now you got 2 Schwietermans and Hallie and Carson Schwieterman. They played Woodland in the regular season. Carson was off in that game, and they lost by 2 points, despite Hallie scoring 30 points. Next week, so later in the conference tournament, they won by 30 points. And so you got 2 Schwietermans that are averaging 20 plus points, 18, 20 points per game. You got Newcastle with the stars they usually have there. Delta, they made all of the Elite 8 last year. Hamilton Heights is significantly better this year. They got some talent back at Hamilton Heights, and Connerville's been playing well as well. Yorktown, even 9 wins. I think that even the worst team in the sectional, Yorktown, I think very much has a chance in this sectional as well. And they gave Jay County a ball game as well. Where do you stand on this sectional? Because I have no idea who wins the sectional.
Yeah, this one's so wide open. It's crazy. I think Connersville probably has the upper hand. Nia Bennett, Serenity Pennington, Kendall Bottomley, Addison Jones. Like, I think those 4 players for them are really good. But here, Hamilton Heights, like you said, they've reloaded. They've got a really good freshman class that's going to really cause some noise here in a couple of years, if not this year, with Addison Bloom, Zoe Curry, Bailey Isley, and then Riley Suarez. A couple of those kids are going to be some of the top kids in the state. So, kind of like Garin, like Hamilton Heights is really going to learn a lot about themselves this upcoming week, and definitely could pull off the upset. But I'm going to go with Connersville, a little bit of an upset pick, or maybe a lot of an upset pick. Based on how they've played so far against teams in the sectional, only being 1 and 2 against them. But I'm going to go with Connersville. I think that first round matchup is going to be excellent. I think both of those first round games are going to be really good. But I think Connersville is going to pull it out.
I'm going to go with Delta because they made that run last year, and yeah, they've lost some games here and there, but I think Delta is a little bit prepared for the state tournament. Yes, it's a tough sectional. They did lose to Jay County by only 4 points, but I think Delta has the team to at least make a run in the sectional and whatnot. So while it's a very tough sectional, and I expect this to be close again, I'm leaning towards Delta. But let's be honest, I think you can pick any. I mean, you can go blindfold in the sectional, and you can kind of throw darts at it and just pick a team there. It's so hard to pick the sectional. Sectional 23 hosted by Western. I'm I'm looking at McConaughey and saying they're probably the favorites here, but I mean, Peru's got Addie Robbins, and she's averaging 19 points per game. Anytime you have a player like Addie Robbins, that could cause some trouble in this section. And I think they gave McConaughey some trouble here. They only lost them by 11 points in the regular season. So they're Miami County rivals. So there's a rivalry there between Peru and McConaughey there. That's a possibility of an upset. And then West Lafayette always plays a pretty decent schedule. So you really can't completely rule out West Lafayette either. But, I mean, I'm leaning towards McConaughey for revenge sectional, but I wouldn't be surprised if Peru gets it done too.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's McConaughey to lose. I think, like you said, Peru could give them a good game, but I think those two teams are the best two teams in the sectional. But I think I agree with you in McConaughey taking the sectional crown this year.
Yeah, McConaughey's got some depth this year. They got 2 or 3 kids that can average 10 or 12 points per game. So I think that, and then they have a little better defense, which I think makes McConaughey more an appealing pick. Sectional 22, Mississinawa. I'm going to be honest with you, Mason. This sectional might be the worst sectional in 3A, if we're going to be completely honest. Not having Normal is definitely noticeable here. I mean, Naomi Hahn and Alana Webb from Marion and New Haven, respectively. That should be a good game, all things considered. I mean, Heritage could get to the sectional championship game. They played well under Jason Miller, all things considered. But this is Belmont sectional going away. They're like Indianapolis Roncalli. They don't have any star players, but they're an epitome of their system. They run a really good defensive trap and zone defense, and they got the Blakey girls that can just get you buckets and rebounds. They got Lainey Fritsch that can hit threes. They're extremely deep team. They might be the team that can compete for a state championship in 3A.
Yep, I agree with everything you said. Belmont, if they lose, it's going to be a massive, massive upset.
There would be a major uproar in Decatur if Belmont doesn't win the sectional. That is for sure. I know those fans down there. They are passionate about the Belmont Braves. Now, here's a sectional that could be very fascinating. Sectional 21 at East Snowball. I think when you look at this sectional, I think it comes down to the bottom half of the bracket. Yes, DeKalb's got a decent team at times, but this is a different DeKalb team from last year. New head coach Mark Pitsley. I don't think they're as good as last year. I think they're a little bit younger. They've had some injuries. They've had some weird losses this year, that especially like to Bishop Dwayner. I don't like that for DeKalb, per se, to be a sectional contender. I mean, I could see even Concordia make the sectional finals. I think that's how wide open the top half of the bracket is. Yes, Olivia Bollinger is the only thing that makes Concordia intriguing, in my opinion. But, I mean, that top half of the bracket is kind of what it is. But the bottom half bracket is interesting because Garrett's done a lot better under Coach Vance with Emma Kaufman, the sophomore sensation, and then Sarah Depew, a really good senior, and they got Avery Leach, a freshman, playing well. So they got 3 really good players at Garrett. Leo's got really good size, led by Leah Chappelle, the 1,000-point scorer at Leo, and Mackenzie Collins in the backcourt. So Leo's size is going to be a problem with the 35 rebounds per game. The game that I think is going to be most interesting is East Noble and Goal. These two met in early January. And this was during the time where Angol was a little bit of that midseason streak where Angol was kind of coming out of that Christmas break funk, if you would, playing pretty bad defense, not playing their best. And Kendall Venerwald did not play her best in either the Fremont or the East Snowball games. And I think the thing with Angol, a lot of it's going to hinge on Kendall Venerwald, averaging 17 points, I think 11, 12 rebounds per game for the Angol Horns. She has to play well for Angol to have a chance, and then they got to get Kendall Holman out of foul trouble to have a chance. But I think Ella Savick is an underrated guard for them, as well as Stella Ella Stockamp for Angol is a really good point guard as well. East Snowball, I think, is the more well-rounded team. They made it to regionals last year. They got a junior-heavy team led by Avery Amstutz, Ryan David. They got Addison Deming, one of their only seniors on the team, along with Kate David. The only thing that worries me with East Snowball is that they have to play without Ellie Wood recently because Ellie Wood is dealing with a back injury. And from what I've been told, some people think she won't be back this year, so the rest of the season because of the injury. So I don't have any confirmation for sure on that, but East Snowball has been playing well despite that injury. And I think the Knights are playing better defense. They've won 8 in a row. I think they're the most well-rounded team to make it to the regionals, but I can easily see Leo or Angola maybe make a run to the sectional championship as well.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously know these teams way better than I. You summed it up as best as I could, even better than I could. I'm going to go Northeast Noble, but yeah, like the bottom half of that bracket is going to be really, really competitive and really fun. But I'm going to go with East Noble.
Yeah, I will be fascinated to see how that first game does with Sectional 21. Sectional 20 in Tippy Valley, this one should be I would say pretty intriguing. I mean, Tibby Valley, I think, is a pretty good team at 15-5, Hallie Wees and Yabby Gonzalez. But Valley, I don't know if Valley's resume quite stacks up with Fairfield and Columbia City. Columbia City's 14-7, yes, but Columbia City's played a really tough schedule. I mean, they played Snyder. That's a game they could have easily won. They lost to a really good Crown Point team. They lost to Homestead, who's probably number 1 or 2 at worst, maybe in the States. Norwell's really good again. Warsaw, they lost them twice. They lost to Belmont, which that was a competitive game. They lost by 9. And kind of like with Ron Kelly and Belmont, Columbia State doesn't really have star players this year. Nisa Tonto and Tor Holler are good players. I think Izzy Kinnear is an underrated kid on the team, but they don't really have star players right now in Columbia City. They win through their defense and through the rebounding and through their hard work, if you would, for Columbia City. Fairfield, a little more talented team with Madison Jones averaging 20 points per game. Ava Herbert's averaging around 15. She's going to Huntington University. Is Ava Herbert. Holler from Columbia City is going to Bethel. So they got some college talent on both teams, whatnot. Fairfield also gave Warsaw a game in at the Hoosier Gym in Knightstown, I believe it was, back in New Year's Eve or close to that. And they gave him a game for 3 quarters. So Fairfield's got some depth here. Paige Part's a good player as a center. Macy Worthman. They got some decent depth for Fairfield. I do wonder how they handled Columbia City's press. That could be one thing that worries me for Fairfield. Fairfield's schedule doesn't really add up with Columbia City's. I would still lean towards Columbia City if we're going based on the test, but Fairfield may have enough talent in the post to potentially challenge Columbia City.
Yeah, I'm big on using your regular season to prepare you for the postseason. I think Columbia City, they're the better team, despite what the record says. They're 6-1 this year against 3A teams. They're only lost to Belmont, and to only play 7 games of your 20 games against 3A competition means you're playing a whole heck of a lot of really good teams in 4A. And obviously, you know who they normally play, what they normally play. They're preparing themselves for the state tournament. They play that system that they all know and love, and they always play well. So I'm going Columbia City in this sectional, and I think they'll do it fairly easily as well.
I think the only thing that worries me is that if they go cold shooting the ball, and Fairfield's got a good defense, if they go cold shooting the ball, if it's a lower scoring game, I like it for Fairfield. So it will come down to defense. Can Fairfield contain the guards of Columbia City, particularly Tonkel and Toller? I think those are the two that I think we would have to watch out if you're Fairfield in that sectional. Sectional 19, Mishawaka Marion. This one should be fascinating. Glenn's a solid team, but I'm going to be honest with you. I'm looking at St. Joe with that freshman superstar at St. Joe. I watched them play against Fremont. They're legit. And then you got Culver Academies. I watched them play as well against Bremen. They're legit as well. I think it comes down to those two teams, and I have no idea exactly who wins it. I'm leaning towards St. Joe, but I can see an argument for Culver Academies.
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% right there. I think St. Joe Culver is going to be the teams that are playing for a sectional championship. I've been pretty high on St. Joe all year long. They've played really well as of the last month or so. They just did get blasted by Penn, but Penn's a really good 4A team, so you can't really put too much stock into that. But I think they're the best team in the sectional. I think they've got a little bit more depth as well than Culver. I think, as you said, they've got a stud freshman who I think is the best player in that sectional. So I'm going to go with South Bend St. Joe.
Yeah. I mean, Culver Academy's run pretty good zone defense. That could be one thing that throws them off a little bit. I mean, we've seen that even in Norwell too, but I liked St. Joe as well. Sectional 18 hosted by Kankakee Valley. We mentioned Kankakee Valley as well, solid team in 3A. Lowell's had some good teams recently. I think it comes down to those two teams if we're going to be completely honest.
Yeah, it will for sure. Lowell's got a couple of solid players in Brooke Dawson, Gallon Hanrath is a really solid forward for them. And they've played, pretty well so far this season. They're 14-6, but have had some tough losses. But Kankakee Valley is always just really, really solid. They've got a really, I wouldn't say young team, but they're not a senior laden team, and they've got some good size inside with Olivia Adams and then fellow sophomore Camry Kruger runs a point for them with Mallory Rose and Jenna Walker on the wings. I think they just do have a little bit more talent, but I think Gatlin Hanrath can cause some problems for them with her size as well. So I'm going to go, in close games, I always, or evenly matched games, I always go with the home team. So I'm going to go with Kankakee Valley to win this one.
Yeah, I'll lean towards Kankakee Valley as well in that one. Last one for 3A Sectional 17, hosted by Calumet. This one's going to be interesting. Bishop Knoll, 9-10. Maybe they could challenge the sectional, maybe. But I'm feeling like this is Highland once again.
Yep, I agree. I think the two best teams here are Highland and Knoll as well. I think Highland's going to win this one. I think it'll be interesting, and it won't be an upset if Bishop Knoll wins. But I do think Highland's a better team on paper. They've played a little bit weaker of a schedule, but do generally play most of their opponents pretty tight and don't, get blown out a lot like some teams from the region end up doing when they go outside of the region. So I think Highland gets this one done.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So that completes 3A. We go to Class 4A. We go to Sectional 16, hosted by Castle. Once again, Gibson Southern's in 4A because of success factor. They got a matchup with Evansville Rights. Castle's had a tradition of excellence as well in hoops. This area pretty well. I think this is going to be a hard section. I think it's pretty clear from last year's experience.
Yeah, this one's always a really tough one. I think Evansville Harrison is not on the level of the other teams. For me personally, I think Wrights is probably the favorite to win it. They've got Bailey Hape, Ryan Wagner, Kyla Mitchell, all really top 50 players in their class throughout the state. And then you also have Kendall Kaiser and then Kirsten Kaiser as players for Wrights who can all score the ball. They've had a really solid year thus far, obviously seeing by the record, and they've played some really good competition. Gibson Southern can cause them a little bit of issue though. I don't think they're probably as good as they were last year, but Paige Schnausch is a junior who's probably one of the best juniors in the state, if I had to guess. Definitely top 5 post player in the state. And so I think that could cause them a little bit of issues, in that first round game. They've already played this year, and Gibson Southern ended up losing that game by, 35 points or something. And that wasn't, too long ago, maybe a month ago or so. And so I think Wrights wins that one, gets the sectional championship. And then I think their toughest competition is going to be Castle, Peyton Mitchell, Isabel Grants, Jordan Polehouse, Azaria Finn, Jaden Scott, like that. Those are legitimate college level players who can make a run for sure. Evansville North's a pretty solid team as well. It's got Zanaya Cooper, Brooke Silva, Lexi Scott, though they just don't have as much talent on the board as Castle does. And Castle's, kind of been hot as of late. They've got some really, really good wins over the past month and a half, and are playing some really good basketball. So I think it's going to be a Wrights Castle matchup in the sectional final. And I know last year I did end up going against Castle in the sectional at their place, and I'm going to do it once again this year, and I'm going to go with the Wrights to win that sectional.
Yeah, I'm gonna go the host here. I'm gonna go Castle to win this one, even though they have to play an extra game to even win this sectional. I'm gonna go Castle to win this one, to be honest with you. Sectional 15 hosted by New Albany. You got Floyd Central. They've got a tradition of power in that area. Jeffersonville, I think the record's deceiving a little bit. Bedford North Lawrence, we know what type of team they have been in basketball over the years. I think those three, can easily make an argument to win the sectional.
Yeah, I agree. I do think it's Floyd Central's to lose. They did lose to Jeffersonville this year, though. So that might be a tougher first-round matchup. But Elise Coleman, Burnley Clark, Riley Roberts, Jaden Drury for Floyd Central, they're just really, really talented. They play really good defense. I'm going to chalk that early season loss to Jeffersonville up as a little bit of a blip in the schedule. They are coming off a loss, as of this recording, to Assumption, Kentucky, who is a really good team from Kentucky. So that, I don't really put a ton of stock into because they'd be a top 10 team in the state. Bedford North Lawrence is obviously down from the Chloe Spreen, Carson Norman days. But even then, they still have a little bit of talent there as well with Trinity Bailey and Miley Sherrill. So they could, potentially run into a little bit of, potential upset territory. They did beat Jeffersonville this year, but they also lost to Floyd Central by 25, and that was fairly recently. So I think that Floyd Central is the most talented team in the state. I think the Bedford North Lawrence and Jeffersonville both could put a scare into Floyd Central, but Floyd Central's got the seniors. They're very good defensively. And Jeffersonville recently did change their coach midway through the year, so that has an effect in it as well. And so I think that Floyd Central is still going to come out with it, even though Jeffersonville has been playing better as of late.
Yeah, I like Floyd Central in that sectional as well. Sectional 14 hosted by Columbus East. You got Columbus East, mainly East Central, Franklin, and Columbus North being the contenders here. I'm feeling like this is East Central in this sectional, but I mean, it's at Columbus East, so there's going to be an atmosphere that's going to favor Columbus North, at least from a home advantage standpoint. But I can see a case for really one of those two teams, but maybe even Franklin to possibly win the sectional.
Yeah, I think Columbus North has a really good shot with Kaylee Harmon, Ava Wilson, Miley McClellan, Kenna Conrad. They're a team that doesn't have any true star power kids, but they're really deep and play a couple bench kids that are really good. Franklin, I think, is maybe the team to beat actually in this sectional. Izzy Stillbauer, Addison King. A couple others are really solid. Their record might not look like they're, all that, but their strength of schedule is top 25 in the state. They play really tough competition. But like you said, I think East Central could cause a little bit of disruption in that. They've got Natalie Stanger, who's one of the top sophomores in the state, Lily Maple, one of the better freshmen in the state. Both of them have length. Both of them are tall. East Central is one of those teams who always just play really well all the time, every single year, it seems like, and play everyone, even when they lose, fairly competitively. Besides, as we can see there, that game against Columbus North in which they lost by 23. But I think Franklin here takes it. I obviously don't think they're on paper or, looking at record, maybe the favorite, but I think that they are the ones that get it done in this one just because they're so well oiled when they're shooting the ball well.
All right, that sounds fair enough. Sectional 13 hosted by Terre Haute North. You look at Bloomington South. You look at Terre Haute South. I think those are probably the two teams with the crash course to meet in the sectional finals.
Yeah, I think
maybe.
Yeah, I think you're probably pretty accurate there. I think that Bloomington North is a little bit better than what their record shows. They've probably played the hardest schedule of anyone in the sectional. They also have kids like Kate Lair and Ashley Stegemoller and Audrey Burton who are pretty solid kids. But then Bloomington South is really good. Julia Lashley, Violet Hall, Tatum DeVries, Quinley Fife, Avery Schwartzman, like you could go on and on. They're super deep. They're super young. They obviously have lost a few more games this year than they did last year. But I think it's going to be probably Bloomington South versus Terre Haute South in the sectional championship. And I think South comes away with that one fairly easily.
Yeah, I like Bloomington South as well in this sectional. Sectional 12 hosted by Center Grove. You got Center Grove, undefeated 20-0. That always gets me a little bit nervous when you got an undefeated team in the state tournament. You never know what could happen in the state tournament. 20-0, but Center Grove's got the roster to make a deep run in 4A South. Is there a team in this sectional that maybe could knock them off? Maybe Decatur Central, but I think Center Grove's a prohibitive favorite.
Yeah, I agree. I think Franklin Central wins the the top part of the bracket. I think Center Grove kind of cruises on to the sectional final. It's at Center Grove, so I don't think they're going to lose. They're 20-0. They've played a top 10 schedule in the state. They've already beat Franklin Central by 2 super early in the season. And I think that was in the county championship as well, if I'm remembering correctly, potentially. But, Franklin Central's got Peyton Duvall, who's one of the top players in the state, Ashley Baker, Anaya Dowdy, Carly Holmes, Aubrey Irwin. Like, they're really talented, but you can't – it's really hard to pick against a team when they're 20-0. Grayson Gilliard going to Davidson's one of the best players in the state. Haley Wagner, one of the better wings in the state. And then they just got a Hannah Jen, Ella Sprong, McKenzie. Like, they just have so many different kids who can hurt you, and they can all shoot. They play a defensive style that just stifles teams. As we can see here, they're not winning games, beating teams 80-20 like some other 4A teams are doing. They're beating teams by slowing it down, playing really, really good defense, limiting second chance opportunities, and basically giving the ball in crunch time to Grayson Gilliard and saying, go win us the game. And when you have a kid like that who likes that and wants the ball and can shoot the ball and can get it to the basket, it's going to be really tough to beat. And I think, Franklin Central obviously has a shot, but I would not bet against Center Grove whatsoever.
Me neither. I think they're favorites for sure in the sectional. Section 11 hosted by Plainfield. And, I think this is going to be fascinating because you got Pike with 21-1, but Plainfield 18-5. I think they're a scary team to watch. I watched them play. I think they were playing Norwell at the Hall of Fame Classic in Newcastle, and they struggled early against Norwell, but they really picked up their defensive intensity and really made it a ball game in the second half against the Knights. I think this could be a fun sectional. I like Pike still, but I wouldn't rule out Plainfield whatsoever. And maybe even Ben Davis could possibly pull an upset here and there.
Yeah. The only thing I'd say about Plainfield is I'm not sure if she'll be back or not, but they are losing, or they haven't had Berkeley Williams due to injury, which is, one of their really good guards. Hannah Mincer hasn't been fully healthy. So I think fully healthy, yes, I think they would, get to the sectional championship. But if they're not fully healthy, I could definitely see Ben Davis pulling off the upset. But again, I'm not sure the injury status and don't want to, say for certain. But fully healthy, if they are, Plainfield definitely can make a run and put a scare into Pike. Ben Davis, though, also really good. They beat Plainfield already this year by 12 back in November. They play a really tough, schedule as any Indy area school does. They're young as well. They have some kids who can really score it. I think Brownsburg actually, though, has a real chance here. If anyone's going to play spoiler, I think it might be potentially Brownsburg. They've played the number 1 schedule in the state this year, so they've played the toughest schedule in the state. They did lose to Pike by 16. They lost to Plainfield by 6, while Plainfield was fully healthy. But then they beat Avon by 30. They beat Ben Davis as well by 2. And I think you can't really go against defense and shooters. And when Brownsburg is playing good defense and shooting the ball, they're really tough to beat. El McCullough is going to Florida Gulf Coast as a really, really good shooter. And then they've got Ava Emberton, who's I went to a game. I don't even remember who it was at this point, early in the year. And she had 28 points as a freshman because she hit 7 or 8 threes in the game. So they have a chance to really scare anyone they come in contact with. But I think Pike, here is the prohibitive favorite. I have them, and have had them for a while as the number 1 team in the state, with the only loss to Homestead. But they're winning games. They're winning by wide margins. They've got a tough game coming up with HSE, which will be a good barometer for them. That that game against Big Walnut that they won by 7. Big Walnut, it's from Ohio, but they would be a top 3 or 4 team in the entire state of Indiana, with a couple Division I kids plus a top 15 junior in the country on that team. Pike is super deep. Like I don't think people understand how deep Pike is. They regularly play 10 or 11 kids every single game. They've got just a surplus of talent with numerous kids. I'm not going to run through all of them, but Savea Mitchell is one of the best freshmen in the Midwest. She's really, really solid. Then you've got 6-foot post Marley Jeffers and Kamari Booker and Alana Devine, who transferred in from Ben Davis. They just have more talent. They might not be the best team in the state, but they are definitely the most talented team in the state from 1 to 10. And it's not close whatsoever. So to get off my Pike spiel, I think Pike's going to win this one, but Brownsburg, could provide some resistance there. Ben Davis could, Plainfield could. Like, this is a good sectional, but I think Pike ends up winning it.
Yeah, I saw them play against Homestead. Yeah, I saw them play against Homestead back in that November game, and they, even for them losing, they gave Homestead more of a scare than I would have anticipated. So, I mean, Pike could easily find themselves to Bankers Life Fieldhouse at some point this season. Sectional 10 hosted by North Central in Indianapolis. Lawrence Central, they have been one of the top teams in Indianapolis for the past couple years. They're very much in the midst. Lawrence North, 9-12. You can't really rule out Lawrence North. I know they're 9-12, but they have that state championship under their belt. They can get hot at the right time. I like Lawrence Central for sure this year, but Lawrence North, they have the resume going for them for what they've been in the recent years.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone can really forget, last season, everyone thinking that Lawrence Central at 21-1 coming into the state tournament would be the favorite to cut down the nets, and then Lawrence North coming into the state tournament at 13-8, were kind of an afterthought. Well, lo and behold, they went in, upset. Lawrence Central won 6 games in a row and made it to Gamebridge and cut down the nets as state champion last year. They are really young. It's a completely different team this year. They've had a couple of kids transfer out. Actually, Kiki Butler transferred from Lawrence North to Lawrence Central. So Lawrence North is just a much different team this year. A ton of sophomores, a ton of freshmen. Kalia Bentley is a really good shooting senior for them, but I just don't think that they have the talent this year to hang with Lawrence Central, with Lola Lampley and Kiki Butler and Anaya McKenzie and Aubrey Ingram. Like, I think those 4 kids are just the best kids, in 4A as a collective 4 players on a team. And if they're not, they're, top 3. So I think Lawrence Central gets it done this year. I don't think that they're going to really run into much issues with it either. Although they only beat Lawrence North earlier this year by 7 points. So Lawrence North has proven that they can hang with them. And it wouldn't surprise me if they did knock them off again, but I don't think they will.
Yeah, I just don't think Lawrence North has the horses this year to quite hang with Lawrence Central 4 quarters in a postseason game. But I would say they're the one that I think has the best chance to compete with them for sure. Sectional 9 hosted by Pendleton Heights. They have definitely been a force to be reckoned with in that area there. I think they are, Pendleton Heights to me would be the prohibitive favorites in the sectional.
Yeah, for sure. I think they've been really good this year. I think better than a lot of people would have expected after Casey Warfel graduated. Ada Hupfer has really transformed her game and has played really well this year. And then you've got, Aubrey Warfel and Olivia Jones and Grace Lee and Ellie Warfel. Those are all kids who are contributing as well, around one, kind of star player. They've really started playing well this month. They've got some really solid wins. They beat HSC already this year, which is a great win in 4A. The only thing I would say about this sectional, and I'm not sure if it's going to happen or not, is that Lawrence Central transfer Riley Shellhammer transferred to Greenfield Central, and the rumor is that potentially she might be available for sectionals. I don't know if that's true or not. I would kind of, err on the side of would be surprised if that's the case, but that kind of, adds a new dimension to Greenfield Central as far as scoring the ball goes, because she's a kid who can come out and score 20 points in, kind of any game, and she could knock 6 threes down in a game. So I think the whole sectional would kind of change if she is playing. But again, I don't think that's probably the case. And so I'm just going to go based on, kind of the season so far. And I'm going to pick Pendleton Heights, and I don't think they're going to have much resistance.
All right, sectional 8 hosted by Carmel. I always call this sectional the sectional of doom in recent years. I think you looked at this and kind of like the blindfold reference. You kind of throw darts and just pick the one you think might win on any given night, because it's that difficult with sectional. I would say if we're going based on talent alone, I like Hamilton Southeastern, but you can make a case for any of these teams without question.
Yeah, you definitely can. I think Carmel and Noblesville are the two, I would say, probably worst teams in the sectional, even though they're, really good teams and have a lot of talent. It's just how good this sectional is. Yeah, I would agree that Hamilton Southeastern is probably the favorite, with KK Holman and Kayla Stidham and Antoinette Green. And, some of those other kids have really been, contributing really well this year. I was wondering how they would step up and kind of help out KK and Kayla, and they've done a really good job of that this year. Westfield's young. They've got Audra Parker and Michaela Hatcher and Lauren Linville as seniors, and then they've got Lillian Clark, who can really fill it up. I saw her score, I think, 33 over this year. Kylie Wyatt and Gabby Bassett all can shoot the ball. They're really solid defensively. And I think that they, are kind of a team to contend with as well. They did lose a low-scoring game to HSE just last week by 15 points, or 2 weeks ago by 15 points. But they've been shown and have been able to, keep games close using their defense. Zionsville's another team with Emma Tinder and Ellie Frobig and Mackenzie Chapin, who can kind of score at will and whenever. But I think this is HSE's sectional to lose. But I would not be surprised at all if they didn't. I think there's a real chance they lose that opening night game to Westfield. But if they don't, I think that they make it through to the sectional championship and win the sectional championship. But I think there's a real chance they lose, but I'm not going to pick against them.
Yeah, this is going to be a hard one. I have a hard time picking against Hamilton Southeastern as well, even though they are a little bit different team from last season. It's still a buzzsaw with them, as they are every year. Sectional 7 McCutcheon. We have less teams to talk about, as this is that part where we start seeing less teams in the field. So we have a 1 in 4 chance of picking this correctly here. You got Harrison, Kokomo, Jeff, and McCutcheon. I think the winner, I'm going to go on a limb and say the bottom half of this bracket more than likely wins the sectional. I'm leaning towards McCutcheon, but Jeff has proven they can be pretty good as well, but I'm leaning towards McCutcheon.
Yeah, I would cut down your 1 in 4 chance to a 1 in 2 chance and say that the winner of this is going to come from the bottom half, like you said. Yeah, I think, look, Jeff is really good. I think they're underrated at a statewide level for how good they are. They're really well coached by Jenna Sullivan. They run a really good, well-coached trap. They play really hard. Maya Layton, Shaylee Barrett, Denia Johnson are 3 really good seniors. But, they've lost to McCutcheon both times they've played them. Once by 3 earlier in the season, and then by 30 in December. So they, it's hard to beat a team 3 times, but I just think with McCutcheon's talent, with Trinity Wilburn and Chloe Finney and Marley Dale and Brian Williams, and then Lily Graves, who's one of the, if not the best player in the state, regardless of class, as well as Kiara Lipscomb Allen and Amira Gibson. I think they just have too much talent. And I think that they win that first round game and end up winning the sectional championship, just because I just think they're the better team.
I agree. I like McCutcheon as well. Section to Southside. Now, in the past, Mason, this was a one-off section. We thought Homestead's going to win this going away. Not this time around. Norwell is in this section now, defending state champions from 3A. And the good news is, Mason, they're on opposite halves of the bracket.
Yes.
So there's a very good chance we see Norwell and Homestead in the sectional finals, which I'm happy for that. I will say this for Huntington North and Coach Andrews. They are playing really well considering their record. They have had their losses. They've had their lumps. But they're playing a lot of freshmen. They're playing a lot of sophomores. Huntington North. A couple of years from now, they might be a pretty decent team in a couple of years. But all things considered, it's Norwell and Homestead. You go back to Norwell. They've had some lumps. Obviously, they lost to Warsaw twice. They lost to Snyder. They had a pretty rough holiday tournament during that stretch. But really than that, they've really coasted through the season. And then you got that win against Homestead back on November 18th. That's a confidence booster for Norwell. They had not beaten Homestead since the 2009 I think it was essentially 09-10 season. It was the 20. Sorry, it might have been 2012 season since the last time they beat Homestead in the regular season. That's a big deal for Norwell to be able to beat the Homestead Spartans. And they did it through their defense. I think Macy Sulphur had 7 steals by herself. Addison Norris had 22 points on I think 4 threes in that game. And they held Homestead pretty well. They held them basically. They forced Gabby Helson to take their threes. My Evs had an off game against Norwell, but I think the one thing that really helps Homestead is the return of Delaney Knoll. And ever since Delaney Knoll came back, they have not missed a beat since. I mean, they have just coasted through the second half of the season. And I saw where all 5 players are averaging 10 points per game at the very least. So their entire starting 5 is really sound. That's not including Ava Scarberry and Susie Paredo. Susie Paredo is a big guard on the Homestead Spartans. Carly Morgan had 21 points against Warsaw. Helsum and Evs are great players. Obviously, my Evs had a 42-point showing against Snyder, just 1 point shy of the school record that Ayanna Patterson still has to this day. You got Whitney Ankerbrook, underrated players as a shooting guard. You got Kendall McLaughlin's a good player as well. And they got all college commits there. Helsum going to Toledo. You got Epps going to Louisville. You got Ankerbrook going to Indiana Wesleyan. Same for Moldering. Like, it's a really talented team. And Delaney Knoll's only a sophomore. So I think when you look at the matchup, I think it really comes down to, can Norwell's defense once again defend the rim against Homestead, and can Homestead get their shots to fall? They had a hard time getting shots to fall in the Norwell game, but lately they've been getting their shots going, and they've been shooting around 45% or better from 3 as of late. That could be the one thing that really favors Homestead. I would lean towards Homestead, but I can see a strong argument for Norwell as well.
Yeah, I think you broke it down just perfectly. Perfect. It's going to be a Norwell Homestead battle in the sectional championship. Norwell did beat Homestead earlier this year, but like you said, Homestead's kind of been firing on all cylinders. I think a lot of people do look at that stretch for Norwell in December and kind of think that they're, maybe not as good as people might think. But that Hall of Fame Classic was tough for them. They beat a good Plainfield team in a battle, and then had to play Warsaw, who's obviously very good. And then that whole Valpo, Fort Wayne Snyder, Norwell thing was just a little weird because that was an event that was supposed to include Noblesville. Noblesville couldn't play, so then it turned into like a 3-team triangular, and Norwell, they all played 2 games in one day. I think Norwell's the team that had to play the back-to-back games. So to play Valpo and then have to deal with the athleticism of Fort Wayne Snyder, like, it was just a really bad 5-day stretch for them. But with that being said, I looked at my polls from the beginning of the year. I had Homestead number 1, which means preseason I thought Homestead was going to win the 4A state championship. So spoiler alert, I'm still going to stick with Homestead to win the 4A state championship, even though I probably don't think they will. But I do think they'll win the sectional championship.
Yeah, but I will say this is going to be a competitive game. I think if it's anything like the first meeting, I expect this to be a close game. And I think it's going to be a different game from what we saw in November. I think this might be a game where both teams are gaining points and it's a seesaw the whole way through. I think this might be, because Homestead has been a completely different team since Delaney Knoll came back. And her just changes everything about this Homestead team as a whole. Sectional 5 at Carroll. I think we can all say Carroll's going to beat Northside Sorry, but Carroll's going to beat Northside. Carroll's played a top 20 schedule. I mean, they're 10-12, but they play a top 20 schedule. They probably should have beat East Snowball. And East Snowball is one of the top teams in 3A. Carroll's a solid team, but the problem is, you look at the top half of the bracket, Snyder and Northup are just as good. And Northup's been dealing with injuries. They've been a little inconsistent as well. Swin Jackson's been dealing with that ankle injury for a while now. Williams Thomas has been dealing. Northup's been battle tested all year long. And then, the Snyder game, Northup was up, I think, a dozen points in the first quarter. Snyder had a big third quarter. They outscored 20-8 in the third quarter. And then they ended up winning that game by a single point. Snyder's also been tested. They've dealt with injuries. They got some freshmen and sophomores contributing, especially with Mackenzie White at Snyder. And then Janae Cooper was out for about a month with an injury. And so ever since she's come back, they have been kind of steamrolling, especially in that win against the Norwell Knights, where Cooper had, I think, 28 or 29 points in that game. So Snyder has been a different team from the team in November. They only lost to Warsaw by only 4 points at the beginning of the season. So I think you look at the sectional. Yes, could Carroll give him a test? I think that January 30th matchup is going to tell us a lot about Carroll in this case. But I'm going to be honest with you, Carroll really is Lily George, Ava Myers. Maybe you bring in Megan Lanning to hit some threes, but Carroll's depth is very questionable right now. I like the depth of Snyder. I like the athleticism of Snyder. I think they're the more consistent team and the more well-rounded team than Northup, but Northup definitely has an older team that possibly can throw some punches at Snyder as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you said once again. I watched Northup last week or the week before when they came down here to play Lawrence Central. Again, they lost by 47 points. Were largely uncompetitive in that game. Now Lawrence Central, I will say, did run up the score just a little bit late in the game. Swin Jackson did, hurt her ankle, had to come out for, a couple minutes. But when she came back in, it was heavily wrapped again, and she just wasn't the same. And they just couldn't really do what they wanted to offensively against the athletes of Lawrence Central, which I would also compare to the athletes of Fort Wayne Snyder. As you mentioned, they're all very athletic. They're all young. Since Cooper's come back, they've had a really, really solid end of their season. There is that one game, though, that Northup did only lose to Snyder by 1 point. I don't know what the result of the spread is going to be this week, or next week, I should say. But I do think Snyder wins again and wins fairly easily, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I think the other thing that also doesn't help Northup is they still got a pretty tough couple games coming up with Columbia City and Homestead. So they still got their own chickens and to deal with this week, let alone deal with Snyder. Snyder only has to worry about Carroll. I think that alone, especially when you add in the Northup having to deal with the injuries, I think that really puts Northup in a tough spot in this sectional. I don't know. I think Snyder's been playing better ball of late. I think they have the better draw, in my opinion. I think Snyder's just been playing better ball since the second half of the year. I just like the Panthers in this sectional. Not convinced, not comfortably, but I still like them quite a bit. Sectional 4 at Goshen. Elkhart's had a good team with Shania Stelp, but I'm going to be honest with you. We've seen that Warsaw team there, and they've been blowing up against everybody. Now, I will say this with Warsaw, they have been dealing with some adversity this week. The last couple of weeks, Reagan Huss has been dealing with a leg injury. They didn't have Alexis Neely in the Homestead game. I was told she was sick in that game. So they haven't quite been themselves the last couple of weeks, partially out of their control at Warsaw. But when you look at Warsaw, they got Jocelyn Brecker and Brooke Zartman. Those two are just fantastic seniors. Zartman leads the state in three-pointers made. Brecker's averaging 25 per game. Brecker's going to Butler. Zartman's going to Miami, Ohio. I mean, look at the scores, Mason. You look at the scores, and some would say, yeah, they're running the score. I don't know about that. That's whatever. The NOC's kind of been difficult. Has had a really tough challenge with Warsaw, just blowing them up this year. But, I mean, Warsaw is really good. They've been number one most of the year for a reason, and they're one of the state contenders for a reason. They have really been the epitome of a team that made it all the way to state last year with the talent they have. That said, Northridge, if there's a team that's going to give Warsaw a challenge, it would be the Raiders because of their defensive scheme. They know Warsaw better than anybody else from the NOC. They gave Warsaw a ball game just a few weeks ago, and it was a one-score game in the third or fourth quarter. But the problem with Northridge was Lily Scholl got into serious foul trouble in the first quarter, and that really made a difference because without Lily Scholl's size, they were not able to utilize the size of Northridge to their advantage. Also, it doesn't help that Cam Conley isn't playing right now for Northridge. She's hurt as well. So that could be a disadvantage for the Raiders as well. But if I'm going to be honest with you, aside from the Raiders, I think Warsaw's the heavy favorite.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're the heavy favorite to win the sectional for sure. I have long said this year that Warsaw is a really good team. They struggled a little bit, like you said, with obviously losing to Homestead, but they were down a couple of players, some key players, obviously in Neely and Huss. So that game result can kind of be, not really thrown away, but still kind of thrown away. And then obviously, I'm sure they weren't fully healthy still when they played Northridge, and had their lowest scoring output. I'm assuming with 43 points of the entire year. That's probably they probably scored over 40 points in every half before this game, it seems like. But yeah, I think Warsaw wins this game pretty easily. I think they're obviously one of the state contenders. To come from the north, I think there's a lot of people online that think I hate Warsaw. I don't hate Warsaw. I think they're going to win the sectional. And then who knows? We'll see where it goes from there. But yeah, I think Warsaw's heavy favorite. I think it would take a monumental upset, especially if Northridge is not healthy to beat Warsaw.
Yeah, I think the thing with that game was, Bricker took a lot of the shots. And she had 28 points in that game. Zartman was held in check really well in that game. And, it was kind of a sloppy game. Northridge kind of threw their best at him defensively and gave him some trouble. That's the only thing that could potentially give Warsaw a challenge. Even not just with Northridge, but even the playoffs. Northridge's size could potentially neutralize the game a little bit, where other teams have not been able to do so with this Warsaw team. In that sense, sectional 3, we're almost to the finish line, hosted by Penn. Past years it was South Bend, Washington, but as you can see, this is far cry from that now with Washington. Yeah. I think Penn's the heavy favorite. They're deep, they're young, they're explosive. I think they have everything you want from a 4A state contender.
Yeah, I would be surprised if anyone comes within 30 points of Penn. I would be surprised if anyone comes within 35 points of Penn. They're going to roll through this.
Yeah, they are definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, Penn's definitely the better team in the sectional. They have a really good. I think they have a really good freshman and a sophomore at Penn. They have a nice team there. Sectional 2, hosted by Valparaiso. I think, to me, that Lily Barnes is the star player for Valparaiso. She's going to Ball State. Really good player for Valpo. Chesterton, obviously a solid team. They've been tested a little bit. They could give Valpo some challenges, but I think Valpo's the favorite for sure.
Yeah, I think so. I think being at home really helps them. Valpo, has been a little bit better than just Lily Barnes this year too, which I was a little bit surprised with. Cadence Clark has given some good minutes. Cheyenne Brown, Delilah Kincaid, they've all played, really well this season so far, and they've tested themselves too. It's not like they've just, kind of stayed up north and played teams up there. You look at their schedule; they've played Norwell and Snyder. They've played Warsaw, which obviously are all teams up there, but then they've also played Eastern Hancock. They've played Lawrence North. They've played McCutcheon. Like, they've played a really tough schedule and have seen different styles of play that, obviously helps prepare you for the state tournament. I think Chesterton is probably a year away. They're fairly young. Nevaeh Brandon, is a junior, and Lindsay McGuffey's a sophomore. So I think they're probably a year away. And I think could probably give them a little bit of a game, but I think Valpo wins this one by double digits. And winning the game by double digits means that I think they're also going to win the sectional, because those are the two best teams by far in the sectional.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And our last sectional, pretty interesting sectional at Munster in sectional 1. You got Lake Central. How they always are tested and whatnot. But then you got this first round matchup between Hammond Morton and Crown Point. I would probably say that winner of that game likely wins the sectional. I would probably lean towards Crown Point, but maybe you could make an argument for Hammond Morton as well. I've seen Crown Point play. They definitely live up to the billing of being one of the better teams in that area.
Yeah. So the weird part about this is Crown Point is probably the better team on paper by about 10 points. But they've lost to Hammond Morton already this year by, I think it was 13 in December. And so that's really going to be an interesting battle to see which team's playing better right now. Hammond Morton with Kyla Patterson and Desire Willingham, like those are two really solid kids who, Patterson's a junior and Willingham's a sophomore, who can lead them to a win over almost anyone. Patterson's one of the most athletic and most skilled kids in the state, regardless of class, regardless of where you're at. But like you said, Crown Point just, kind of has a lot of talent. I'm surprised they lost to Hammond Morton because, Ava Ritchie kind of leads that team, as a sophomore. And then you've got Sophie Hart, who's a solid post player, Ivy Henderson, who's a 6'4" center in the senior class, or she's a junior. Sophie Hart's a senior. And then Ava Punak is a solid forward wing type kid. Crown Point's played the tougher schedule by far. Hammond Morton has not played as tough a schedule. Those Illinois teams you see there are pretty bad Illinois teams. Just knowing some of those teams, and then they've got some other pretty easy opponents, as you could tell there by the scores. But I mean, you cannot dismiss the fact that they beat Crown Point by 13 earlier this year. So like you said, I think those are the two obvious best teams in the sectional. I think Crown Point gets it back though and wins that first game and then ends up winning the sectional.
All right, so that does it with our coverage of the sectionals. I do want to ask you one final question here. As we get ready for the 51st Girls Basketball State Tournament, what's the one thing you're most excited or most interested about what is to come for this state tournament?
Yeah, I think I'm always excited to see the matchups that happen for the sectional finals on Saturday nights. I'm always excited to see the upsets. Just for me as a unbiased observer, not covering any certain team or certain portion of the state, for me it's nice to be able to sit back and kind of just watch carnage happen. And if it happens, I think last year, if I'm remembering correctly, the sectionals pretty much went as planned for the most part. There weren't any big upsets for the most part. So I always root for a little bit of carnage, but I'm always interested to see who is playing on Saturday night and then who kind of lives up to their billing and wins games. And then it always seems like there's a team one or two a year that makes a little bit of a run that's kind of out of nowhere. Obviously, we saw it with a couple teams from your area last year. There are a couple teams who me personally have penciled in as, okay, this team is a semifinal like night team. The state semifinals, I guess you could say. They should be there, and if they're not, then upset happened along the way. But I think just looking at every class, I think 3A is wide open. I think 1A, in my opinion, is pretty much Marquette Catholic Borden. I think 4A North is going to be really, really fun to see how some of those matchups work out, and I think you're going to see a lot of different styles of play as well, which is always fun to see the kind of the chess match between coaches and teams and programs. And then 2A, I think 2A is really loaded as well. There's a lot of teams who, every time I make my poll every week for 2A, I always have a list of an extra 10 teams who I think could probably be in the top 10 of my poll, but just don't make it. So I think 1A is going to be fun outside of those two teams I mentioned. 2A is going to be fun. 3A is going to be really fun. 4A North is going to be really fun. So, yeah, I'm just looking forward to seeing who is able to kind of play up to their potential and who looks like they could make a run come, the middle of February and March.
All right, that will do it for our coverage here for the sectional previews here in 2026. We should meet again at some point to discuss what's going on over the next few weeks or so on whatnot. Where can they find you real quick for your coverage?
Yeah, so all my coverage is on Twitter at Asher Scouting, Twitter and Instagram, much more much more vocal about it on Twitter or my personal Mason H. Asher as well on Twitter.
All right. Thank you, Mason, for your coverage and your insights always. And let's have a great state tournament.
Thank you.